Hey everyone, and welcome to Nighttime Stories. I'm here to help you drift off into a peaceful sleep. Let me know where you're watching from. I always love seeing how far these stories reach. Now, get comfortable and relax. I never planned on being in that quarry. It was one of those places people talk about in half-jokes, like a dare more than an actual destination. The locals said kids used to swim there in the summers until someone drowned. Then it just sat abandoned, a wide pit of gray rock and stagnant water. I had heard of it for years, but never actually gone until that night. It was me, my friend Ben, and his cousin Lauren. We were bored, restless, and thought it would be fun to wander around and scare ourselves. We parked down a narrow dirt road and walked the rest of the way. The air was damp, carrying that heavy mineral smell that quarries seem to have. You could feel the air shift as we got closer, colder than the woods around it. When the trees thinned, the ground dropped away in front of us, and there it was. The quarry looked like a giant open mouth in the earth. The walls were steep, jagged gray stone, and at the bottom I could see the flat patch where people probably used to hang out before it was fenced off. Only the fence was long gone. We were just standing there, talking quietly, when the light caught my eye. A flicker at the bottom of the pit. I thought maybe it was a flashlight at first, but then I realized it was orange, alive. Fire. We all crouched down near the edge and peered over. That is when we saw them. Bonfires. At least 3 of them, maybe more. Their flames licked upward, casting shadows that stretched and warped along the stone walls. Around the fires, figures moved, dozens of them. Some were standing in clusters, some walking slowly, and some seemed to be swaying in rhythm. It took me a second to understand what I was hearing, but once I did, my whole body locked up. They were chanting. Not loud, not like a concert or a crowd at a sports game, but deep and steady. Dozens of voices blending together into a sound that felt like it pressed against your chest. I could not make out the words, if they were even words, but the tone was enough. It was ritual, it was intentional, and it was happening right in front of us, in that abandoned quarry. Ben whispered something under his breath, and I shushed him, though my hands were trembling. I remember thinking we should just back away, leave quietly, and never talk about it again. But I kept staring. The fires were hypnotic, and the chanting seemed to thrum in my bones. My brain could not wrap itself around the idea that this was real, that people were actually down there doing this. Lauren grabbed my arm and squeezed hard. I followed her gaze and saw him. A man standing apart from the others, higher up on a ledge that jutted from the rock. He was wearing a mask. I do not know how else to describe it except that it looked handmade, maybe carved wood or bone, something pale and unnatural in the glow of the fire. Even from that distance, I could tell his eyes were fixed on us. I knew it because he lifted an object to his mouth and blew. The sound that came out was low and hollow, like a horn made of animal bone. It cut through the chanting in an instant. Every voice stopped. The entire quarry fell into silence, except for the crackle of the fire and the faint echo of that horn dying away. The stillness was worse than the chanting. It was total, suffocating. All the figures turned their heads toward us at once. I felt the bottom drop out of my stomach. My legs wanted to run, but I could not make them move. I just stared, wide-eyed, while the masked man lowered the horn and raised one hand. He pointed toward us. Then they started climbing. It was not just 1 or 2. It was dozens, their dark shapes moving toward the walls like a wave of insects. Hands grasped for rocks and roots, feet pressed against ledges, and the fires below cast them into strange, long shadows as they ascended. The sound of scraping rock reached us as their fingers clawed for holds. That broke me out of my freeze. I grabbed Ben by the sleeve and hissed that we had to go. We turned and bolted back into the trees. I could hear Lauren breathing hard behind me, twigs snapping under her boots. We did not speak, we just ran. The woods were darker than I remembered, and every direction looked the same. We finally slowed, gasping for air, trying to listen for pursuit. That is when I saw the first one. Not a person, but a mark. A rope tied between two trees across the trail, knotted into a shape I did not recognize. It looked almost like a figure eight twisted wrong, with dangling ends that swayed slightly in the breeze. I thought maybe it was nothing, maybe kids marking the path, until I saw another, and another. Every trail we tried to take had one of those rope symbols strung across it, like some kind of barrier or warning. The woods suddenly felt alive with them, like we had wandered into something that had been planned long before we arrived. Ben swore under his breath and tried to pull one down, but the knot was impossibly tight. Lauren begged him not to touch it, her voice breaking with panic. I did not know what to do, so I just kept moving, my chest tight, convinced that any second I would hear that horn again, closer this time. The woods were silent except for us, but the silence was not comforting. It was loaded, like dozens of eyes were watching from the dark. Every time I turned my head, I swore I caught glimpses of movement between the trees, shadows slipping just out of sight. We stumbled through the forest until our legs gave out, until we were too far to know if we had even left the quarry behind. And still, those rope symbols hung across the paths. It was like the woods had been remade into a maze we were never meant to escape. When we finally stopped, hunched over and gasping, I realized my hands were shaking so badly I could barely keep hold of the flashlight. Ben kept swearing under his breath, muttering about how they had seen us, how they knew. Lauren just cried quietly, pressing her face into her jacket sleeve. That was the first night. That was how it started. And even now, thinking about it, I know we should have left long before we reached the quarry. Because once you see something like that, once they know you saw them, you do not really get to leave. When I think back on that night, the strangest part is how quickly we convinced ourselves it was over. We stumbled through the woods, eventually finding the dirt road where we had left the car, and drove out in a panic, headlights cutting through trees like we were escaping from a nightmare. Once we hit the main highway, the world felt normal again. The road stretched out, lined with reflective markers, and the hum of the tires on the asphalt had this hypnotic way of making me believe we had left it all behind. None of us spoke much on the ride home. Ben gripped the steering wheel like his life depended on it, jaw clenched, eyes locked on the road. Lauren sat curled up in the back seat, her face pale and streaked from tears. I kept glancing at the rearview mirror, half expecting to see headlights appear behind us, or worse, figures in the road. But there was nothing. Just us and miles of dark forest. When I finally got home, I locked the door, double-checked the windows, and sat on the edge of my bed until the sky began to lighten. At some point, I drifted into sleep, and when I woke, it was almost noon. Sunlight poured through the blinds, and the memory of the quarry felt distant, like a bad dream. For a few days, I managed to treat it that way. We did not talk about it much. When we did, it was in quick bursts, like none of us wanted to linger on the details. Ben joked that it was probably some weird backwoods church gathering, nothing more, though his voice always cracked a little when he said it. Lauren avoided the subject entirely, and I figured that was for the best. But then, the small things started happening. The first was when I left my apartment one morning and noticed a piece of rope tied to the tree at the end of the parking lot. Just an ordinary rope, weathered and frayed, knotted in a strange shape. I froze when I saw it because it looked exactly like the one strung across the trails in the woods. I stood there staring at it for a long time before finally untying it and shoving it in the dumpster. My heart was pounding the entire time, but I told myself it was nothing, a coincidence. Later that week, Lauren texted me saying she thought someone was following her. She had left work late and noticed the same silver sedan behind her all the way across town. When she turned onto her street, the car slowed, but did not follow her into the cul-de-sac. She admitted she might be paranoid, but she could not shake the feeling. I did not know what to say. I wanted to tell her it was just her nerves, that we were all wound too tight after what happened. But the truth was, I had noticed the same thing. Different cars, maybe, but always the same feeling of eyes on me, always the sense of someone keeping pace. Ben brushed us off when we mentioned it. He told us to stop feeding into the fear, that the mind makes patterns where there are none. But he was lying. I could tell. His voice had that edge, the same one it had the night he floored the gas pedal out of the woods. The real turning point came 2 weeks later. I came home from work and found an envelope tucked into the crack of my apartment door. No name, no stamp, just a plain white envelope. My stomach sank before I even picked it up. Inside was a single piece of paper, folded neatly. Written in block letters were 3 words: "Do not run." That was it. No explanation, no threat, just those words. I sat on the floor with the paper in my hands, my pulse hammering in my ears, until my phone buzzed. It was a message from Ben, a photo. It showed his car parked in his driveway, taken from the street. The caption underneath read, "See you soon." He said it had come from an unknown number. That night I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard the horn from the quarry echoing in my head. Every time a car drove past outside, I convinced myself it was stopping. By morning I felt sick from exhaustion, and I knew this was not something I could keep ignoring. We met at a diner that afternoon, the 3 of us crammed into a booth in the corner. None of us had much of an appetite. Lauren stirred her coffee until it went cold. Ben just stared at the tabletop, and I laid the envelope down between us. No one touched it. Lauren finally said it. "We should go to the police." Ben shook his head immediately. He said we had no proof of anything, just vague stories about chanting and fires, some rope, and an envelope with words anyone could have written. He said the cops would laugh us out of the station. Maybe worse, maybe they would actually go looking and stir up trouble we did not want. I wanted to argue, but deep down I knew he was right. It was our word against nothing, and even if the police did take us seriously, what would happen? They would find a group of people camping in the quarry and maybe ticket them for trespassing. That would not stop what was happening to us. When we left the diner, I noticed a man sitting alone in a booth near the door. Long coat, hood pulled low. I had not seen him come in, but he was staring at us, not pretending otherwise. His eyes followed me all the way to the parking lot. That night I dreamed of the quarry, not the fires or the chanting, but the silence after the horn, all those heads turning in unison, all those eyes finding us in the dark. I woke up gasping, and for a moment I swore I smelled smoke in my apartment, faint and acrid. But when I checked, there was nothing. The next morning, there was a rope tied to my doorknob. It was not knotted like the ones in the woods. This one was different, a simple loop, like a noose. That was when I realized this was not paranoia. It was not coincidence. They had found us. They were watching, and they wanted us to know. I kept the rope in a shoebox under my bed for a while, as if hiding it away meant it would stop being real. I never told Ben or Lauren about that one. I figured they already had enough on their plates, and maybe I thought if I ignored it long enough it would fade into nothing. That was the way I had handled most strange things in life up to that point. Pretend it does not exist, pretend it never happened, and eventually the mind smooths it over like a wrinkle in a sheet. Except this wrinkle kept deepening, twisting tighter, until I could not convince myself anymore. 2 days after I found the rope on my doorknob, I got home from work and realized the picture frames on my wall were crooked. All of them, in every room, tilted the exact same way. I know for a fact I had not left them like that. I live alone, I lock my doors, and I am careful about small things. At first I wondered if maybe the building had shifted, but the idea crumbled the second it entered my mind. Someone had been inside. Someone had touched every single frame just to leave that subtle mark behind. That night I called Ben. He answered on the 3rd ring, his voice hoarse and shaky, like he had not slept in days. I told him about the picture frames, expecting him to tell me I was being dramatic. Instead, he said he had come home the night before and found his TV turned on to static. He never leaves it on. He said the volume was low, just loud enough to notice, and when he went to turn it off, he realized the words on the screen were not just random static patterns. For a split second, they spelled out the word stay. Neither of us laughed about it. There was no brushing it off anymore. Lauren texted me while we were still on the phone. Just 2 words. Help me. I drove to her apartment as fast as I could, heart racing the whole way. By the time I got there, she was sitting on her couch with every light on, clutching her phone like it was a lifeline. Her hands were trembling. She told us she had woken from a nap to the sound of footsteps in her kitchen. When she went to check, there was no one there, but her back door was wide open. On the counter was a single Polaroid. It showed her sleeping on that same couch, her mouth slightly open, blanket tangled around her legs. I swear my blood ran cold holding that photo. It was not just the fact that someone had been inside while she was asleep. It was the way the shot was framed, perfect and centered, like whoever took it had been standing there for a long time, making sure they got it right. We argued for hours about what to do. Ben wanted to go to the police now, even if it meant they thought we were crazy. Lauren said no, that bringing them into it would just escalate things. I sat there staring at the Polaroid, unable to make a choice. Every option felt wrong. The next morning, I went out to my car and found another envelope tucked under the windshield wiper. Same plain white paper, no stamp, no name. Inside was a single photo. Not a Polaroid this time, but a printed shot on glossy paper. It was the 3 of us at the diner the week before, sitting in the corner booth. The angle suggested it had been taken from just a few tables away. None of us had noticed anyone with a camera. Written across the bottom in black marker were the words, "You should not have left." I nearly vomited right there in the parking lot. I called Ben again, but he did not answer. When I finally got through to him later that night, his voice was quiet, broken. He said he had found something carved into the hood of his car. A rope symbol, just like the ones in the quarry, etched deep into the paint. He said he had not driven since, too afraid of being followed. The feeling of being watched grew heavier every day. In grocery stores, I caught glimpses of people staring from the end of the aisle, only to vanish when I blinked. Walking to my mailbox at night, I swore I heard footsteps pacing just out of sight. And once, as I turned the corner into my apartment complex, I saw a figure standing at the far end of the lot, hood pulled low, perfectly still. I looked down to unlock my door, and when I looked up again, they were gone. I started sleeping with a knife on the nightstand. Some nights, I did not sleep at all. The chanting from the quarry replayed in my head, dozens of voices rising and falling in unison. Sometimes I thought I heard it faintly outside my window, just at the edge of hearing, like an echo on the wind. Lauren called one night in tears, saying she could not take it anymore. She said she woke to scratching sounds inside her closet, and when she finally opened it, there was nothing but the faint smell of smoke. She wanted to leave town, maybe crash with family in another state. I told her I was thinking the same thing. Ben, though, sounded almost defiant when we talked. He said he was not going to run. He said if they wanted to scare him, they would have to do more than symbols and photos. I wanted to believe him, but his voice shook too much for me to think he meant it. The breaking point for me came a few nights later. I was lying in bed, eyes wide open, too wired to sleep. The apartment was silent, so silent I could hear the blood in my ears. Then, without warning, my phone buzzed. An unknown number. I should not have answered, but I did. On the other end was nothing at first, just the sound of breathing. Slow, steady, deliberate. Then, faintly, voices. Not one, but many, dozens, whispering all at once. I could not make out the words, but the rhythm was the same as that chanting in the quarry. It built and built, until I thought my head would split open, and then it stopped. I sat there in the dark, gripping the phone so hard my knuckles turned white, waiting for something else. Finally, a single voice came through, clear and sharp. "Do not run." The line went dead. That was when I knew we had never escaped. The quarry had followed us home. I did not tell anyone about that phone call right away. Maybe it was denial, or maybe it was shame. I could not handle the thought of saying it out loud, of giving the words more weight than they already had in my head. Instead, I sat in my dark apartment staring at my phone until sunrise, half expecting it to buzz again. It never did, but the silence afterward felt worse somehow, like the air was waiting. The next morning I forced myself out the door just to feel normal. I went to grab coffee, sat in my car, tried to breathe like a person who was not unraveling, and that is when I saw it. Tucked under the windshield wiper was another envelope. I froze. I knew before opening it that it would not be good. My stomach churned like I had swallowed rocks. Inside was a single photograph. It was my bedroom, taken from the corner by the closet. The bed was unmade, the sheets half pulled back, and I was lying there fast asleep. The angle was intimate, close, far too close for comfort. And the worst part was that I knew I had locked every door and window the night before. Someone had been inside again, standing in my room while I slept, close enough to hear me breathe. I called Ben right away. He picked up, sounding exhausted. Before I could even explain, he cut me off and said, "They are inside here too." He told me he had woken up to his front door wide open, though the lock had not been broken. On the kitchen table was a small pile of dirt shaped into a circle, with a rope coil laid in the center. He said it smelled like smoke. Lauren had not answered any of my calls for 2 days. I finally drove over to her place. When she opened the door, her eyes looked wild, rimmed red from crying. She pulled me inside and shoved something into my hands. It was another Polaroid. This one showed the three of us together in the quarry, the night we had first gone exploring, but the angle was impossible. It had been taken from the center of the pit where the bonfires had burned, as if someone had been right in the middle of the chanting circle looking up at us. None of us remembered anyone holding a camera. Lauren told me she had been hearing footsteps on her roof every night around the same time. She had called the police, but by the time they showed up, the sounds had stopped. She said she was scared they thought she was crazy. I admitted that I had been keeping things from her too, that I had photos taken in my sleep. For a while we just sat in silence, the three of us broken people trying to make sense of something that did not make sense. That was when Ben said something I will never forget. He leaned forward, his voice low and hollow, and said, "They do not want us to go to the police. That is why they keep leaving signs instead of hurting us. They want us scared. They want us to know they can reach us anywhere." It was not a comforting thought, but it felt true. We agreed to spend the night together at Lauren's place, figuring there was safety in numbers. We stacked furniture against the doors, checked every lock twice, kept the lights on. For a while, it almost felt normal, sitting there drinking cheap beer, trying to laugh it off like college kids on a bad trip. Then, just after 2 a.m, we heard it. The sound of chanting, faint but unmistakable, drifting in through the walls. At first I thought it was my imagination, but when I looked at Lauren and Ben, their faces told me they heard it too. It grew louder, a steady rhythm of voices rising and falling in unison, words we could not understand, but somehow felt in our bones. We froze, every muscle tense, waiting for something to happen. Then came the knock. 3 slow, deliberate raps against the front door. We did not move. None of us even breathed. After a few seconds, the knock came again, harder this time. Ben grabbed the knife he had been keeping in his jacket pocket and gestured for us to stay quiet. He crept to the peephole, hesitated, then stumbled back, pale as a ghost. He would not tell us what he saw at first, but when I pressed him, his voice cracked. He said there were at least half a dozen figures standing in the hallway, hoods pulled low, perfectly still, facing the door. We did not open it. We sat there in the living room clutching whatever we could use as weapons, praying they would leave. The chanting outside built to a fever pitch, then stopped all at once, leaving the apartment in suffocating silence. After a long time, maybe an hour or maybe less, we dared to look through the peephole again. The hallway was empty. None of us slept that night. At dawn, we went outside to find the door covered in symbols. Dozens of rope coils drawn in black ash, smeared across the wood, the floor, even the walls. The smell of smoke lingered long after the sun rose. Ben wanted to fight back somehow. Maybe catch them on camera. Maybe prove they were real. Lauren was terrified at the idea. She said that acknowledging them only gave them more power, that we should just pack up and leave town. I did not know which side to take. Every choice felt like the wrong one. That evening, as I drove home to grab some clothes, I caught sight of something in my rearview mirror that made my chest seize. A figure in a hooded robe was standing at the edge of the street, watching my car pass. When I looked again a second later, they were gone, but I know what I saw. I know I am not losing my mind. Back at my apartment, another envelope waited on the doormat. This one was heavier than the others. Inside was a flash drive. Against my better judgment, I plugged it into my laptop. There was only one file, a video. The footage showed my apartment, filmed from multiple angles. Every room, every corner. Someone had been inside, placing cameras, documenting me without my knowledge. The video cut between shots of me cooking, brushing my teeth, sitting at the computer. Then it lingered on a clip of me sleeping, the camera angled from the closet doorway. The frame stayed there for several minutes before a shadow moved into view. A hooded figure stepped closer to the bed and just stood there watching. The video ended with a single phrase typed across the screen: "You cannot hide." I shut the laptop so hard the sound echoed through the whole apartment. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely breathe. That was when I realized we were no longer just being watched. They had already moved inside our lives. The worst part is how normal everything looks in the daylight. I walked through my apartment that morning, sunlight pouring through the blinds, and it could have been any other Tuesday. Coffee maker humming, neighbors walking their dogs, mail truck rattling down the street. Nothing about it screamed danger. Nothing except the video still looping in the back of my mind, the hooded figure watching me sleep, the words on the screen telling me I could not hide. I had not closed my eyes once the night before. Every time I even started to drift, I swore I heard a floorboard creak or the faintest scrape of rope against wood. By the time the sun came up, I felt like my body was buzzing, like every nerve was electrified. My first thought was that I had to get out, that if I just drove far enough, maybe it would all fade. But then I remembered Lauren and Ben, and the guilt sat heavier than the fear. We met at a diner on the edge of town that afternoon. It felt safer being in public, surrounded by people, the chatter of conversations, the clink of silverware. Lauren sat with her back to the wall, her hands wrapped tight around a mug of coffee even though it had gone cold. Ben looked like he had not showered in days. His eyes were sunken, his movements twitchy, always glancing over his shoulder. I slid into the booth and said nothing at first. We just sat there, three broken people trying to figure out how to act normal in a world that was no longer normal. Finally, Ben leaned forward and said, "They are in control. We cannot fight them. They have already mapped us out." He told us he had found more rope coils tied to the trees outside his apartment building, each one marked with black ash. They were closing in. Lauren shook her head hard, like she was trying to shake something out of her skull. "No," she said. "We can still leave." I packed a bag. "I am ready. If we just get in the car right now and go, maybe we can outrun it." Her voice cracked halfway through, like she did not even believe herself. I told them about the flash drive, about the footage inside my apartment. When I said the words out loud, they sounded worse, like I had invited something by admitting it. Lauren's face went white. Ben only muttered, "See, they are already inside." The waitress came by with a pot of coffee and I flinched so hard she stared at me. I mumbled something about not sleeping well and she just gave a polite smile before moving on. That is what stuck with me later, the way everyone else kept living their lives, oblivious to what was happening to us. It made me feel cut off, like we were stuck in a bubble no one else could see. That night we agreed to stick together again, this time at Ben's place. He lived in a crumbling building downtown, the kind with thin walls and a flickering hallway light that never got fixed. We dragged his couch in front of the door, stacked chairs beneath the windows, left the television on for background noise. Lauren refused to sleep at all, pacing the floor with her arms wrapped around herself. I do not know when I drifted off, but I woke with a jolt to the sound of something scraping against the door. It was not loud, just steady, a dragging sound like rope being pulled across the wood. Ben was already awake, clutching the knife he had been keeping close. His hand shook so badly I was afraid he might stab himself by accident. We sat there in the dark listening as the sound continued, slow and deliberate. Then came the chanting, muffled at first, like it was coming from the walls themselves. Dozens of voices in unison, that same rhythm we had heard in the quarry. Lauren started crying, silent at first and then harder, her body shaking with it. I wanted to comfort her, but I was frozen in place, every muscle locked. The chanting grew louder until it felt like it was filling the apartment, echoing from every surface. And then, just as suddenly, it stopped. The silence that followed felt heavy, pressing against my chest. We stayed like that until morning, too scared to move. When we finally worked up the courage to look, the door was covered in fresh markings. Symbols drawn in ash, circles with lines through them, patterns I did not recognize but somehow felt wrong. The wood was scarred where something sharp had scratched against it, like claws or a blade. Ben snapped after that. He started pacing, muttering about how we had to confront them, how running would not change anything. He kept saying we had to go back to the quarry, that the answers were there, that we could end it if we faced them. Lauren screamed at him, said she would never go back to that place, that he was insane. I stood between them, my own thoughts tearing me apart. Part of me wanted to believe Lauren, that if we just left it would fade away. But another part of me could not shake the feeling that Ben was right, that this thing would keep spreading until it consumed us no matter where we ran. That afternoon, I found another envelope taped to my door. This one did not have a photo or a flash drive. It had a single sheet of paper with a hand-drawn map. The quarry was marked in red, and beneath it the words, "Come back, or we come in." I showed it to Lauren and Ben. Lauren broke down, sobbing that it was a trap, that if we went back they would kill us. Ben only nodded, as if it confirmed what he already knew. "They are giving us a choice," he said. "We either go to them on our own terms or they take us on theirs." That night I could not sleep again. I kept seeing the hooded figure from the video, the way it stood in my room watching me. Every time I closed my eyes I smelled smoke, felt rope brushing my skin. By dawn I had made up my mind. We would go back to the quarry. We went back. I wish I could say I fought against it or that I had the strength to walk away, but the truth is the choice was never really ours. Once you have been marked by something like that, it sticks to you. You can ignore it, you can pretend you are free, but deep down you know it will come knocking sooner or later. That is what broke me down in the end. Better to face it on our feet than wait for it to crawl into our homes again. The drive out to the quarry was silent. Lauren sat in the back seat staring out the window, her face pale and hollow. She had cried until her voice was gone. Ben sat up front, gripping the wheel so tight his knuckles were white, muttering to himself in low whispers. I kept my eyes on the tree line, half expecting to see those hooded figures keeping pace with us. It was still early when we pulled off the main road, but the forest felt darker than it should have, heavy with mist. When the quarry came into view, my stomach turned. The bonfires were already lit, flames snapping against the morning air. The smoke curled upward, dark and greasy. Figures moved at the bottom, dozens of them, their masks glinting in the firelight. I wanted to turn and run, but my legs would not listen. Something about the place pulled me forward, like gravity had shifted. We followed the dirt path down, the air filled with the smell of smoke and something fouler, like burned hair. No one stopped us, no one spoke. The hooded figures parted as we approached, leaving a clear path to the center. There was a circle marked in ash and rope, symbols carved into the ground. At the center was a stone slab, blackened from fire. One of the figures stepped forward, taller than the rest, mask carved with deep grooves. He lifted his hands and the chanting began, low at first, then building. The sound vibrated in my chest, in my teeth, until it felt like my bones might shatter. Lauren collapsed to her knees, clutching her ears, sobbing. Ben stood rigid, eyes wide, as if he had been waiting for this moment all along. The leader pointed at me. My name carried through the chanting, clear as if it were whispered directly into my ear. I staggered back, shaking my head, but two figures stepped forward and seized my arms. Their grip was like iron. They dragged me to the slab, forcing me down, my face pressed against the cold stone. I begged then. I did not care how pathetic I sounded. I told them I would do anything, give anything, if they just let me go. The leader leaned down close enough that I could smell smoke and earth on his breath. He whispered, "We already have what we want." The chanting reached its peak. My vision blurred, colors twisting. I felt something press against my chest, cold and sharp, but it never cut. Instead, it sank inside me like smoke, filling me. My body convulsed. For a moment I thought I had died, but then it stopped. The chanting fell silent. When I opened my eyes, the figures were gone. The fires burned low, unattended. The quarry was empty, except for the three of us. Lauren was curled on the ground, shaking. Ben stood nearby, staring into the distance with a look I cannot even describe. He seemed emptied out, hollow. We left without speaking. The drive back felt longer, endless. The forest looked the same, but I knew better. Something had changed. The silence between us was heavy, broken only once when Lauren whispered, "They are not finished." I tried to go back to my life after that. I really did. I went to work. I sat in traffic. I smiled at neighbors. But I am not the same. None of us are. Lauren barely answers her phone anymore. Ben disappeared 2 weeks later. His apartment was stripped bare. No forwarding address. I am the only one left, and I do not know why. The worst part is the watchers. I see them sometimes, just at the edge of things. A shadow leaning against a tree when I walk to my car. A figure across the street standing perfectly still, gone when I blink. Once I found a rope knot tied around the handle of my front door. The ash pattern burned into the wood. They are reminding me. I know this all sounds insane. I would not believe it myself if I had not lived it. But here is the thing that keeps me awake. They told me they already had what they wanted. I do not know what that means. I do not know if it is something inside me now, or if they just wanted to mark me, to make me theirs. All I know is I wake up every night at the same time, heart pounding, the smell of smoke in my room, and I never check the window anymore, because I am terrified that if I look, I will see one of those masks staring back at me. So yeah, we went back to the quarry. We survived. At least, on paper we did. But I do not think survival is the right word for this. I am not sure I am alive in the same way anymore. And the scariest part is knowing they could come back whenever they want. They will not need to carve another map or send another letter. They already know where I am, and I do not think they are done. It was supposed to be a simple day hike. My daughter and I planned it for weeks, picking a trail in the Pacific Northwest known for its gentle slopes and beautiful views. I wanted to give her a break from the city, some fresh air, time away from screens and noise. We packed a small backpack, some snacks, a map I had studied carefully, and set out early in the morning, full of excitement and anticipation. The first few hours went perfectly. We talked about school, friends, and the upcoming summer. She was laughing, her hair catching the sunlight as it filtered through the tall trees. The forest was alive with birdsong. and the trail beneath our boots was soft with moss and pine needles. It was one of those rare moments when the world felt peaceful and right. But then something changed. It started small. She slowed down, looked over her shoulder more often, her smile fading. I asked if she was tired or thirsty, but she shook her head, staring ahead with a distant look. I figured she just needed a rest, so we stopped by a small stream to drink and catch our breath. She sat quietly on a fallen log, her fingers tracing the rough bark as if lost in thought. When we got up to continue, she hesitated at a fork in the trail. I checked the map again and told her which way to go, but she seemed uncertain. I told her to trust me, to keep close, but she stopped completely and looked deeper into the trees, eyes wide. "Dad," she said softly, "do you hear that?" I strained to listen. The forest was quiet, the birds gone silent as if waiting. I couldn't hear anything unusual. I told her it was probably just the wind or some small animal. She nodded, but didn't seem convinced. We pressed on, but the path grew narrower and less familiar. The sun climbed higher, and the shadows deepened. Then, without warning, she slipped and fell on a patch of wet leaves. She caught herself, but looked shaken. "Maybe we should turn back," she said, voice trembling. I agreed, and we started heading the way we came, but the trail seemed to twist and shift. The trees grew closer together, and every turn looked the same. I checked the map again, my confidence waning. Then I realized something that made my stomach drop. We were lost. I tried to stay calm for her sake, but the panic was rising inside me. We called out, hoping for a response from other hikers, but the forest swallowed our voices. Hours passed as we wandered, retracing our steps, trying to find landmarks. The sun began to dip, casting long shadows that made the woods feel unfamiliar and threatening. Then it happened. My daughter disappeared. One moment she was beside me, and the next she was gone. I called her name, my voice breaking with fear. I searched frantically, pushing through thick underbrush, scanning the trees, but she was nowhere to be found. I felt the world close in around me, the cold creeping through my clothes, the darkness swallowing hope. I ran back to the trailhead and alerted the rangers. Search parties were organized, flashlights and dogs sent into the night. I joined them, my heart pounding with desperation. We combed the forest, shouting her name, calling over and over, but the woods answered only with silence. As night deepened, the search was called off temporarily. They told me to rest, to be ready for morning, but I couldn't sleep. I sat outside the ranger station, staring into the blackness of the forest, praying for a sign. And then, at 2 a.m, in the dead silence, I heard it. Her voice. Soft and clear, trembling but unmistakable. "Dad, I'm here." My blood ran cold, but I didn't hesitate. I grabbed a flashlight, a radio, and my jacket and plunged into the dark woods, following the sound. The trees loomed like silent sentinels, their branches whispering secrets I couldn't understand. The forest floor was uneven, slick with dew and fallen leaves, and I stumbled more than once, but I kept moving, guided only by her voice. It called to me again, closer this time. "Dad, I'm here." I called back, voice cracking with emotion. "Where are you? I'm coming." The path seemed to wind deeper into the woods, the trees thickening, blocking out the stars. The air grew colder, heavier. My flashlight beam darted across trunks and leaves, searching for any sign of her. Then, suddenly, the voice stopped. I froze, heart hammering. I called her name again, but the silence was complete. I scanned the ground and found something that made my breath catch. A pair of boots. They were worn and covered in mud, too large to belong to my daughter. Flat, adult-sized boots, lying abandoned on the forest floor, as if dropped in a hurry. I knelt down, fingers trembling as I reached for them. There was no sign of anyone nearby. No footprints, no broken branches, nothing but the damp earth and the stillness. I called out again, louder this time. "Honey, are you there?" Only the whisper of the wind answered me. I sat back on my heels, overwhelmed by a mix of relief and dread. Relief that she might still be close, but dread because whatever had called me here was not the daughter I knew. The forest felt alive with secrets, and I realized then that this was only the beginning. The silence that followed finding the boots was suffocating. I sat there in the dirt, my heart pounding louder than the forest around me. The only sound was the faint rustle of leaves, but even that felt amplified, like the woods were holding their breath. I kept looking around, shining the flashlight in every direction, but all I saw was the dense darkness and the thick trunks of towering trees. No sign of my daughter, no sign of anyone. The boots lay in front of me, their worn leather slick with mud and glistening faintly under the flashlight's beam. They were far too big for her. I touched the laces, feeling the rough texture, the cold dampness. I could not explain how they had ended up here, in this place where I had just heard a voice I thought only she could make. The thought twisted inside me, a knot of confusion and terror. I called out again, voice breaking, "Sweetheart, where are you? Please answer me." I waited, but no reply came. I wanted to believe she was close, hiding behind a tree, scared but safe, waiting for me to find her. But deep down I feared something else was at play. Something that used her voice to lure me deeper into the woods. The moonlight struggled to break through the thick canopy above, casting strange shadows that danced just beyond my sight. My mind raced as I tried to piece together what had happened. Had someone taken her? Was this some cruel trick by another hiker? Or was the forest itself playing with me, twisting reality in ways I could not understand? I remembered the stories the rangers had told me about these woods, tales of people disappearing, strange lights, and voices calling out at night. I had laughed them off before, but now, standing here alone, the stories felt far too real. The line between what was possible and what was terrifyingly unknown blurred. I stood up slowly, boots crunching on the forest floor, and looked back toward where the trailhead should be. The darkness seemed to close in from all sides, and the path I had walked earlier was swallowed by shadows. My flashlight flickered once, then steadied, but the sudden dip in light made me jump. I felt my skin prickle with the weight of unseen eyes watching me. I began to move cautiously, boots sinking into the soft earth, every step heavy with dread. The voice had stopped calling, but the feeling of being drawn deeper into the forest did not fade. I told myself to stay calm, to focus on the map in my head, but the woods seemed to change with every turn. Trees that were once spaced far apart now grew close together, their branches intertwining like fingers blocking the sky. I kept calling her name, the sound echoing through the silence, but the only response was the occasional snap of a twig or a rustle in the underbrush. I paused, holding my breath, straining to catch any sign of movement. The dog's bark might have been comforting, but she was miles away, at home with my partner, safe but worried. Hours felt like minutes, and minutes stretched into eternity. I felt like I was walking in circles, trapped in a nightmare where the only guide was a voice that had vanished. My legs ached, my throat was raw from shouting, and the cold seeped into my bones. Yet I could not stop. Not while there was even the faintest chance she was out here, waiting for me. Suddenly I heard it, a faint whisper carried on the wind. It was barely audible, like a breath, but it was unmistakable. "Dad!" My heart leapt. I dropped to my knees, eyes wide and searching. "Where are you? I'm coming." The whisper came again, closer this time. "Dad!" I scrambled forward, pushing past low branches and tangled roots. The voice was like a thread, pulling me through the dark, fragile and desperate. I stumbled over a fallen log, hands scraping against rough bark, and kept going. Then, just as quickly as it had started, the voice stopped. I stood still, breath ragged, scanning the darkness for any sign of her. The forest was still once more, oppressive in its silence. The sudden absence of sound felt like a trap, and a cold dread settled deep in my stomach. I knelt again by a patch of damp earth, fingers tracing the outline of something hidden beneath the leaves. It was another boot, this one half buried and worn, matching the first in size and age. I felt tears sting my eyes. How many pairs were there, and whose were they? I sat back against a tree trunk, the cold seeping through my clothes. I tried to make sense of what was happening. The voice I had heard was hers, or something perfectly mimicking her. The boots belonged to someone else, someone much larger. Was it a person hiding in the woods, or something that could change shape and sound to lure prey? I thought about calling for help, but the radio I had left at the ranger station was miles away. My phone had no signal deep in the forest. I was alone. Fear and determination warred inside me. I knew I could not give up, but I also knew I had to be careful. If something was out here, it was clever, patient, and dangerous. I stood slowly, wiping dirt from my hands, and started walking again. This time, I moved deliberately, listening carefully for any sounds that might lead me to her. The wind shifted, carrying a faint scent, something earthy and faintly sweet. I followed it cautiously. The forest around me felt alive with unseen movements. Shadows flickered at the edge of my vision. Every crunch of leaves underfoot sounded like footsteps behind me. My pulse quickened. Suddenly, I caught a glimpse of something, a figure standing between two trees, just beyond the reach of my flashlight. It was too tall to be my daughter. It stood perfectly still, watching me with eyes that seemed to glow faintly in the dark. I froze, unable to tear my gaze away. The figure's mouth moved, but no sound came. Then it stepped back into the shadows and vanished. I called out, voice shaking, "Who's there? What do you want?" Only silence answered. I was alone again, but the forest had changed. The night was no longer just dark. It was something else, something alive and waiting. I knew then that finding my daughter meant facing whatever this was, and that meant stepping into the unknown, deeper into the woods where voices could lie and shadows could take shape. The moment the figure disappeared into the darkness, I felt the weight of the forest pressing in from all sides. My breath came in short, sharp gasps, and the cold seeped deeper into my bones. The moon was hidden behind thick clouds, leaving only the feeble beam of my flashlight to pierce the oppressive blackness. Every sound, the rustling leaves, the distant call of an owl, felt magnified, and yet there was a heavy silence beneath it all, like the forest was holding its breath. I took a cautious step forward, heart hammering, trying to convince myself I was not losing my grip on reality. I reminded myself of the facts. My daughter was missing. I had heard her voice calling out, unmistakably hers, but the signs around me suggested something was very wrong. The boots, the shadows, the figure just seen, they all pointed to a presence I did not understand. I needed to find her. No matter what, I had to believe she was alive somewhere in this tangled maze of trees and darkness. The forest was unfamiliar territory now, every twist and turn holding a new uncertainty. I tried to recall the route we had taken earlier, but the trail markers were faint or absent. The trees all looked the same in the low light, their trunks blending into one another like ghostly sentinels. I called her name again, my voice cracking with desperation. "Emily, where are you? Please answer me." The silence that followed was cruel and endless. I stood still, listening for any hint of a response, but the night offered nothing. My mind raced with fear and frustration. What if the voice I heard was not hers? What if I was chasing a phantom drawn deeper into the woods by something that wanted me lost? I shook off the thoughts and pressed on, moving slowly and deliberately. I kept my flashlight steady, scanning the forest floor for any sign, footprints, clothing, anything that might tell me where she had gone. I stumbled over a root, catching myself against a tree. The bark was rough against my palms, grounding me in the moment. I told myself to stay focused, to not let panic take hold. Suddenly, I heard a faint sound, a rustling, maybe footsteps. I stopped dead, heart racing. I held my breath, listening. The sound came again, soft and distant, moving through the underbrush. I called out, "Emily, is that you?" No answer, but the movement continued, slow and deliberate, just beyond the reach of my light. I took a few careful steps toward the noise, trying not to make a sound. The forest seemed to close in around me, the branches reaching out like grasping hands. I felt exposed and vulnerable. Then a flash of movement caught my eye, a shadow slipping between two trees. I swung the flashlight in that direction, but found nothing but empty space. My pulse quickened. Was I imagining things? Or was someone, or something, watching me? I wanted to turn back, to return to safety, but the thought of leaving her out here alone was unbearable. I clenched my fists and pushed forward, deeper into the woods. The terrain grew steeper and more tangled, but I refused to stop. As I climbed over a fallen log, my foot caught on something solid. I looked down and saw a small, crumpled piece of cloth tangled in the leaves. It was a piece of her jacket, the blue one she had been wearing. My chest tightened with a mixture of hope and dread. She had been here. She was close. I called out to her again, voice stronger now. "Emily, I'm coming for you. Stay where you are." I waited, breath fogging in the cold air. No answer, but something shifted in the darkness. I caught a glimpse of a figure watching me from behind a tree just for a second. It disappeared when I blinked. I started running then, heart pounding in my ears. I called her name until my throat burned, stumbling over roots and rocks, not caring where I was going as long as I kept moving toward her. The forest twisted around me, a labyrinth that seemed to change with every step. After what felt like an eternity, I came to a small clearing. The moon broke through the clouds, casting pale light on a patch of soft moss and wildflowers. In the center lay a single boot, the same flat, adult-sized one I had found earlier. Beside it, a small stone was balanced precariously. I knelt down, fingers brushing the cold surface of the boot. It was damp and covered in mud, but strangely clean compared to the forest floor. The stone felt warm, almost alive in my hand. Suddenly, a chill wind swept through the clearing, carrying with it a whisper barely audible but unmistakable. "Dad." I looked up, heart in my throat. The voice was distant but clear, a fragile thread of sound that pulled me forward. I stood, flashlight trembling in my hand, and moved toward the edge of the clearing where the trees grew thickest. The voice called again, closer this time. "Dad, I'm here." I stepped into the shadows, branches brushing against my face, leaves crunching underfoot. The voice led me deeper into the forest, weaving through ancient trees that seemed to watch silently. As I followed, I realized something chilling the voice was no longer quite right. It was her voice, but distorted, stretched thin like a memory fading with time. It felt like an echo, a shadow of her calling from somewhere just beyond reach. I stopped, gripping a tree for support. The realization hit me hard. This was not my daughter. Something was using her voice, something that wanted me lost, desperate and alone. The forest grew colder still, and the shadows deepened. I heard a faint rustle behind me and spun around, but saw only darkness. I called out once more, voice steady despite the fear rising inside. "Emily, if you're here, show me. Let me find you." For a moment, there was only silence. Then, from the darkness, a figure emerged, not quite human, but not entirely otherworldly either. It wore clothes like mine, boots like those I had found, but its eyes were hollow, empty voids. It smiled a slow, unnatural curve of lips and whispered in a voice that was both hers and not hers. "Come with me." I felt the pull of that voice, like a tide dragging me forward. My feet moved without command, following the figure deeper into the night. But I fought it, a spark of hope and love burning inside me. "No," I said firmly, voice breaking the spell. "I'm coming for my daughter." The figure hesitated, eyes narrowing, then dissolved into the mist like smoke caught in the wind. I stood alone once more, breath steaming in the cold air. The forest was silent again, but I knew the night was far from over. Somewhere out there, my daughter was waiting, and I was not going to stop until I found her. The night seemed to stretch on endlessly as I pushed forward, the darkness thickening around me like a living thing. My flashlight barely cut through the blackness, flickering now and then as if struggling to hold onto its meager light. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves, made me jump, my nerves raw and frayed. But I could not stop, not now, not when I was so close. The figure's voice had faded, replaced by a heavy silence that pressed against my ears. I could feel my heartbeat pounding in my chest, the cold air biting at my skin, and the ache in my legs growing worse with every step. But the thought of my daughter, alone and scared somewhere out there, drove me onward. I forced myself to keep moving, repeating her name like a prayer. As I walked, the forest seemed to change. The trees grew even taller and older, their trunks thick and gnarled. The underbrush became denser, tangled roots and vines reaching out to snag my boots and tear at my clothes. I had to crouch and crawl through narrow passages, my hands scraping against rough bark and jagged stones. It was as if I had entered a different world, one where time and space warped around me. I stopped briefly to catch my breath beside a moss-covered boulder, wiping sweat from my forehead. The forest was silent, except for the distant hoot of an owl and the soft drip of water from leaves heavy with dew. The cold seeped deeper into my bones, and I shivered, pulling my jacket tighter around me. My phone was dead, my radio useless without signal. I was utterly alone. I tried to recall the details of the day, the trail we had taken, the landmarks I had noticed, but now they seemed meaningless. The woods had swallowed them whole, leaving only confusion and fear. I felt lost in every sense of the word. Suddenly, I heard a faint sound, something between a whisper and a sigh carried on the wind. My heart leapt. I followed it, moving cautiously, careful not to disturb the fragile balance of the forest. The sound led me to a small clearing bathed in silver moonlight. There, sitting on a fallen log, was a figure. At first I thought it was my daughter. The shape was small, delicate, wrapped in a faded jacket, but as I drew closer, doubt gnawed at me. The figure's head was bowed, shoulders trembling with silent sobs. I called out softly, "Emily?" The figure lifted her head slowly. Her face was pale, eyes wide and glassy, reflecting the moonlight like pools of water. For a moment, relief flooded me, but then I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The eyes were empty, hollow, lacking any spark of life or recognition. She spoke, voice trembling, "Dad, I'm cold." I stepped forward, heartbreaking. "I'm here. I'm going to get you out." But as I reached out, the figure vanished like mist, leaving only a whisper on the wind and the faint scent of pine and earth. I staggered back, breath catching in my throat. The forest seemed to pulse with energy, as if it was alive and watching. I realized then that what I had found was not my daughter, but something else, a lure, a shadow using her image to draw me deeper. Tears welled in my eyes, and for a moment I felt hopeless. But then, a quiet voice in my mind reminded me of why I was here. My daughter was real. She was out there, somewhere beyond the shadows and illusions. I pressed on, guided by a mixture of instinct and desperation. The woods closed in around me, but I refused to give up. Every step was a battle against exhaustion and fear, but I kept going. Hours passed, or maybe it was minutes. I had lost all sense of time. The forest seemed endless, a maze of darkness and silence. Then, just as I was beginning to doubt everything, I saw it. A faint glow in the distance, soft and pulsing, like the flicker of a candle in a storm. I moved toward it, heart pounding with a fragile hope. The glow led me to a small creek, its waters shimmering under the moonlight. On the far bank I saw footprints, small and light, like a child's. They were fresh, pressed deeply into the muddy earth. I knelt to examine them, breath trembling. They were hers. I called out softly, "Emily, I found your footprints. I'm right here." The forest answered with a low, mournful wind that whispered through the trees. Then, from the shadows beyond the creek, I heard it, a soft, familiar voice. "Dad." I didn't hesitate. I crossed the creek, water soaking my boots, and stepped into the darkness beyond. The trees thinned, and I found myself at the edge of a clearing bathed in pale moonlight. There, standing alone, was my daughter. She looked as I remembered, young, scared, but alive. Her eyes met mine, wide and searching. "Dad," she whispered, voice trembling, "I'm so cold." I ran to her, pulling her into a tight embrace. Her skin was cold, almost icy, but she was real. She was here. We stayed there for a long moment, holding onto each other as the forest around us seemed to exhale. The shadows retreated, and the heavy silence lifted like a weight. I asked softly, "Where have you been? What happened?" She looked up at me, eyes filled with tears. "I don't know. I got lost. The woods, they changed. I heard voices, but they weren't yours. I was scared." I nodded, tears streaming down my face. "I was looking for you. I heard your voice too." She squeezed my hand, her grip weak but real. "I'm sorry I scared you." "We're together now," I said firmly. "I'm not going anywhere." We made our way back slowly, carefully retracing steps I barely remembered. The forest felt less menacing now, more like a place that had tested us and found us strong. As dawn broke, the first light filtering through the trees, I felt a profound sense of relief. We had survived the night, the unknown, the fear. At the trailhead, I called the rangers and told them she was safe. Their faces softened with relief, but I saw in their eyes a mixture of disbelief and caution. These woods had stories, they said, stories that would not be easily forgotten. I held my daughter close as we waited for help, feeling the warmth of her body against mine. The night had taken so much from us, but it had not taken her. The boots, the voice, the shadows, they were real, but they were not stronger than a father's love and determination. We left the forest behind, but the memory stayed with me, the way the darkness could twist and deceive, the way hope could be a fragile flame in the cold. And as we drove away, I knew one thing for sure. I would never stop listening for her voice, no matter where it called me. The morning light spilled into the car as I held Emily close, her shivering slowing as she warmed against me. Her small frame was trembling less, but the cold she'd been carrying was deeper than the chill of the night. I glanced at her pale face. The way her eyes fluttered closed briefly before she clutched my shirt tightly. It felt surreal to have her back after all the fear and searching. We were silent for a while, the car's engine humming softly beneath us as we waited for the rangers to arrive. I wanted to ask her everything, but I knew she wasn't ready to talk, not yet. The forest had left its mark on her, and the weight of the unknown was still heavy between us. Instead, I just held her, letting the quiet moments settle in, like the calm after a storm. When the rangers finally showed up, their faces were a mix of relief and concern. They listened carefully as I explained everything: the hike, the voice in the woods, the boots, the figure. Some of it they seemed to understand, other parts they glanced at with wary disbelief. They said these woods had a reputation for strange disappearances, for eerie stories whispered among hikers and locals alike. I nodded, knowing that what I'd experienced was beyond their usual explanations. Emily stayed close to me, her small hand gripping mine tightly. I could tell she was still scared, but being with me helped. She kept glancing out the window at the trees, the shadows that now seemed less threatening in the bright daylight. I wanted to protect her from what we'd seen, from the way the forest could twist reality and play tricks on your mind. That day, as we made our way back to the trailhead and eventually home, I kept replaying everything in my head. How could something mimic her voice so perfectly? How could the forest feel so alive and yet so dangerous? I knew I wasn't imagining things. This was real, and it was far from over. Over the next few days, Emily and I tried to return to normal life, but the experience clung to us like a shadow. She had trouble sleeping, sometimes waking up in the middle of the night whispering about voices in cold places. I did my best to comfort her, but I felt the same creeping fear beneath my skin. The woods had left a scar on us both. I started researching, reading everything I could find about disappearances and strange phenomena in those forests. There were stories going back decades, people hearing voices, shadows following them, footprints appearing and disappearing without explanation. Some accounts mentioned a presence that lured travelers deeper into the woods with familiar sounds and sights. I shared some of these stories with Emily carefully to help her understand she wasn't alone. She listened quietly, eyes wide but thoughtful. I didn't want to scare her more, but I also wanted her to know that what she experienced was not her fault or imagination. One evening, as I was sorting through some of my notes, Emily came to me with a small, worn notebook she had found buried under her bed. It was filled with drawings, trees, faces, and strange symbols. On the last page was a simple message in her handwriting. "The white trees are watching." My heart skipped a beat. I asked her about it, and she told me about a place she'd glimpsed in the forest during those dark hours, a grove of trees so white and luminous they seemed otherworldly. She said the figure she saw had asked if she had seen the white trees before disappearing. That phrase haunted me. What were these white trees? Were they real, or part of whatever presence had been calling her? I knew I had to find out. The next day I took Emily back to the trailhead. She was hesitant but brave, her small hand firmly holding mine. We walked slowly along the trail, searching for anything that matched her description. The forest was alive with birdsong and the rustling of leaves, but beneath that was the same feeling, a quiet watchfulness. After hours of walking, we came to a secluded glade where the trees looked different. Their bark was pale, almost glowing in the sunlight filtering through the canopy. The air here was cooler, and the ground was carpeted with soft moss that seemed to absorb sound. Emily's eyes lit up. "This is it," she whispered. We stayed there for a while, sitting quietly among the white trees. Emily traced her fingers along the bark, as if trying to memorize every detail. I took photos and notes, hoping to learn more. The place felt peaceful, but also charged with something ancient and powerful. As the sun began to set, we made our way back. The forest no longer felt threatening, but still mysterious. I promised Emily we would come back again, that we would keep looking for answers together. That night, I lay awake thinking about everything. The voice, the boots, the figure, the white trees. It was like a puzzle with pieces scattered across time and space. I realized that this was not just a story about a lost girl. It was about something deeper, something that connected us to the forest in ways we could barely understand. I knew the road ahead would be long and uncertain, but I also knew one thing: I would never stop searching for the truth, for my daughter, and for the light hidden in the shadows of those woods. The morning after our visit to the glade of white trees, Emily and I woke to a quiet house, the kind of stillness that feels heavy with anticipation. The air outside was cool and crisp, the Pacific Northwest mist clinging to the windows. Despite the sleep that had finally claimed me after days of exhaustion, I felt a nervous energy buzzing beneath my skin. We both did. Emily sat at the kitchen table, her fingers tracing the edges of the notebook she had brought with her, the one filled with her drawings and that haunting message about the white trees. She looked up at me, her eyes steady but carrying the weight of everything we had been through. "Dad," she said softly, "I think the forest wants me to remember." I nodded, not sure what to say. I had hoped for some normalcy, some sense of closure, but it was clear that the story was far from over. We decided to go back to the woods, not because we wanted to, but because we had to. The white trees were more than just a place. They were a symbol of something ancient, something that tied Emily's disappearance to the forest itself. The stories I'd read, the experiences we'd lived, all pointed to a presence that blurred the line between the natural and the supernatural. That afternoon, we packed what we could: flashlights, blankets, food, and made our way back to the trailhead. The ranger station was quiet, the rangers nodding in understanding when I told them where we were headed. They warned us about staying together, about the strange phenomena reported in these parts. Their words weren't empty caution, they carried a genuine concern. Emily held my hand tightly as we stepped onto the trail. The forest greeted us with its usual chorus of birds and the gentle rustling of leaves. But beneath that, there was a palpable tension, like the woods themselves were watching, waiting. We moved slowly, following the path toward the glade. The farther we went, the more the familiar sights faded, replaced by the pale bark and soft moss of the white trees. The air grew cooler, almost electric. Emily's breathing slowed, her face calm but focused. When we reached the clearing, Emily stopped and looked around, her eyes scanning the trees as if searching for something. I waited, heart pounding. Then she stepped forward and knelt by the base of one tree. She reached into the moss and pulled out a small weathered box, half buried beneath the earth. The wood was cracked, the metal hinges rusted, but it was intact. She looked up at me, voice barely a whisper. "I think this is why I was lost." Together, we opened the box. Inside were faded photographs, old letters, and a small hand-carved wooden figure, a girl with wide eyes and delicate features. The letters told a story of a young girl who had vanished in these woods decades ago, her disappearance shrouded in mystery and sorrow. As I read, I realized the story mirrored Emily's in eerie ways. The girl had spoken of the white trees, of voices calling her into the forest. The townsfolk believed the woods held a spirit, a guardian who both protected and ensnared those who entered. Emily clutched the wooden figure to her chest. "Maybe she's the one I heard," she said softly. The forest around us seemed to hum with life, the shadows shifting in the corners of my vision. I felt a strange calm, as if the woods were acknowledging our discovery. The presence that had haunted us was not malevolent, but bound to the land, a guardian caught between worlds. We stayed in the glade until the sun dipped below the horizon, the light fading into a gentle twilight. As we made our way back, the forest felt different, less a place of fear and more a realm of memory and connection. Over the following weeks, Emily's nightmares eased and her laughter returned. We visited the glade often, honoring the girl who had come before and the forest that held her story. We planted a small memorial, a circle of stones with the wooden figure at its center. I learned that sometimes the unknown is not a threat but a story waiting to be told, a bridge between the past and present. The forest had taken my daughter, but had also given her back in a new way, wrapped in mystery and hope. And as I watched Emily play beneath the canopy of white trees, I knew that while the woods would always hold their secrets, we had found our own piece of peace, a story of survival, love, and the enduring bond between a father and his daughter. I have been on a lot of camping trips, and most of them blur together in my memory. There is always the same mix of smoke in your clothes, the same lukewarm beer by the fire, the same sound of wind cutting through the trees at night. That is what I expected when my friends invited me to spend a weekend in the Appalachians. Nothing special, just another trip with tents, cheap hot dogs, and too many mosquito bites. We arrived late in the afternoon after driving a couple of hours into the hills. The site was a public one, not some deep backcountry ordeal, but far enough from the nearest town that the only light you could see at night was the fire and the moon. There were 3 of us. I brought my old canvas tent. My buddy brought his cooler and fishing poles, and his girlfriend packed enough snacks to keep us alive for a week. The spot itself was decent enough, a flat patch of dirt with a rusty fire pit and a wooden picnic table that had probably been there for decades. Off to the side, tucked between a cluster of trees, was the outhouse. The first thing that struck me about it was the smell. Now, I know outhouses never smell good. That is part of the deal. But this was different. It was sour and heavy. Not just waste, but something that made my throat tighten when I got too close. It clung to the air around the little shack and seemed to drift into camp with the breeze. I figured it had just not been cleaned in a long time. It was easy to ignore at first because we were busy setting up camp and joking around, but by the time night fell, I could not shake it. I remember lying in my tent after midnight, the fire reduced to glowing coals, listening to the sound of the woods settling down. There is a rhythm to it if you pay attention, the cicadas humming, the occasional branch snapping under a deer's hooves, the distant call of an owl. It usually lulls me to sleep. But that night, something else broke the pattern. It was faint, almost too faint to notice at first. A rasping sound, like someone clearing their throat. I froze, holding my breath, and it came again. A cough, just one, then silence. I told myself it was nothing, maybe an animal, maybe even one of my friends. But when I listened closer, the direction was clear. It came from the outhouse. I lay there in my sleeping bag for what felt like an hour, every nerve in my body tight, waiting for it to happen again. It never did. Eventually, exhaustion won out, and I drifted into a restless sleep. The next morning, over instant coffee and burnt pancakes, I mentioned it. My friend laughed, said maybe some hiker had wandered through and stopped for a smoke break in the shack. His girlfriend frowned, though. She said she thought she heard footsteps sometime in the night, slow ones circling near the edge of camp, but she had been too tired to check. We all brushed it off, not wanting to sour the mood. Still, I could not get it out of my head. Later that day, when I went to use the outhouse, I noticed something strange. The door was shut, secured with an old padlock that looked like it had not been touched in years. I rattled it out of curiosity, and it held firm. There was no way anyone had gone inside. That unsettled me more than I wanted to admit. If the door had been locked, who had coughed? I kept that thought to myself the rest of the day. We fished at the nearby stream, played cards, and talked about old high school stories around the fire. I tried to let the normalcy of it wash away the unease. It almost worked. But that smell lingered, stronger than ever once the sun went down, carried on the night air until it seemed to hang over the entire camp. By the time I crawled into my tent again, my nerves were shot. I lay awake long after my friends were snoring, staring at the nylon ceiling, straining to hear any sound beyond the hum of insects. And when the wind shifted, carrying the scent of rot and something sour, I swore I heard it again. That cough. It was closer this time. I did not move, did not breathe. I just lay there, every muscle tense, waiting for something else. The sound of footsteps, the creak of the shack door, anything. But after that single cough, the woods went silent again. I barely slept that night. When dawn finally broke, I crawled out of the tent with dry eyes and a pounding head. The outhouse sat where it always had, gray and crooked against the trees, the padlock still hanging from the latch. My friends teased me for looking so jumpy, but I could not shake the feeling that something was wrong. The smell was worse in the morning light, sharp and unmistakable. It did not just smell like waste anymore. It smelled like something rotting, something that had been sitting too long in a place it should not be. I told myself maybe it was a dead animal. Maybe one had crawled under the shack and gotten stuck. That was easier to believe than the other thought scratching at the back of my mind. That someone was in there, someone who should not be. The second day at camp started like any other trip I had been on. The morning was cool, the sun just breaking through the trees, and the air smelled sharp with pine. But underneath all of that was that foul odor again, drifting from the outhouse. It was not just bad, it was heavy, like it had weight to it. The kind of smell that sticks to the back of your throat and makes your stomach twist. I tried to ignore it, telling myself that maybe a raccoon had crawled under the shack and died, or maybe the whole thing was just too old and unkept. But after hearing the cough the night before, every whiff felt like proof that something was wrong. We decided to hike that morning. There was a marked trail that wound up into the hills and gave a view of the valley, and it seemed like a good way to distract myself. The trail was rough but manageable, the kind of hike that leaves you sweating but satisfied. The air felt cleaner the farther we got from camp, and for a while, I was able to let go of the unease that had settled in my chest. My buddy was cracking jokes, his girlfriend was snapping photos, and I almost convinced myself that I was just being paranoid. But when we got back in the late afternoon, the first thing I noticed was the lock on the outhouse door. It was broken. The old, rusted padlock that had hung on the latch was now snapped clean through, the pieces lying in the dirt. The door hung slightly open, swaying with each breeze. I froze at the sight, every hair on my arm standing on end. My buddy noticed too, frowning as he picked up the broken lock. "This thing was solid," he said. "No way it just broke on its own." We stood there staring at the open doorway. From where we were, the inside looked dark, shadows swallowing the little space hole. The smell was worse now, pouring out of the shack in waves. My friend muttered a curse and kicked the door open. Inside, it was not just a toilet. There were piles of things. At first, I thought it was trash. Old food wrappers, crumpled water bottles, clothing tossed in heaps. But the longer I looked, the more it became clear these were not leftovers from campers. These were lived-in piles, shirts folded neatly in some spots, blankets spread thin on the floor, a half-empty pack of crackers sitting on a wooden ledge. The walls had strange scratches along them, like someone had been clawing the wood out of boredom or desperation. And then there were the Polaroids. They were scattered across the floor and tucked into corners, dozens of them. I picked one up with shaking hands and felt my stomach drop. It was a photo of the outhouse itself, from the outside, taken at night. Another showed the fire pit at the campsite. Another, the stream where we had been fishing. Every one of them showed campers. Some looked old, the colors faded, the edges curled with time. Groups of people laughing around the fire, families standing by their tents, kids splashing in the stream. Normal snapshots of strangers who had once been here. But then I found one that froze me completely. It was me. I was standing at the edge of the stream, holding a fishing pole, my face turned just enough that the camera had caught me clearly. The photo was crisp, recent. I had worn that same shirt earlier that day. I dropped it like it burned me. My chest tightened, breath caught in my throat. My buddy picked it up, and his face went pale. His girlfriend covered her mouth with both hands. None of us spoke for a long moment. The silence pressed in, broken only by the faint creak of the shack in the wind. Then my friend muttered, "We should not be here." We backed out, closing the door behind us, though it hung loose on its hinges. I could not stop glancing at the tree line, half expecting someone to step out. Every shadow felt alive, every rustle in the brush made me jump. The rest of the day passed in a haze of nerves. We tried to keep busy, cooking dinner and gathering wood, but none of us could shake the feeling that we were being watched. That night, I did not even try to sleep. I sat by the dying fire, staring into the dark, every sound of the forest amplified. My friends eventually dozed off, but I sat there, clutching a flashlight like a weapon. The woods were too quiet. No owls, no crickets, no wind, just a heavy silence pressing down. At some point, I heard it again. The cough. Not faint this time, not distant. It came from the outhouse, sharp and ragged, like someone clearing their throat after a long silence. The hair on my neck stood up. I aimed the flashlight at the shack. The beam caught on the wooden door, the shadows thick around it. The smell drifted stronger, curling through the air. My stomach churned, bile rising. I did not move, did not speak, just sat there frozen until the sound faded, leaving only silence. When dawn finally came, I felt like I had aged years. My eyes burned from lack of sleep, my chest ached with tension. My buddy asked if I had heard it too, and when I nodded, his girlfriend whispered that we needed to leave. But he shook his head, said it was probably some drifter living rough, someone who had broken in to get by. He tried to sound confident, but his voice trembled. We packed faster than I have ever packed in my life. Even as we loaded the car, I could not shake the thought of that photograph. Someone had been close enough to take it without me noticing, close enough to watch us all day. As we drove away, I looked back through the trees one last time. The outhouse door was wide open now, swinging on its hinges. For a second, I thought I saw movement inside, a pale shape shifting in the dark. I blinked, and it was gone, but the smell lingered in my nose the entire drive home. By the third day, the mood of the trip had completely changed. It was no longer about hiking or fishing or sitting by the fire. Every one of us was on edge, looking over our shoulders, jumping at the smallest sounds. The woods, which had first seemed peaceful and inviting, now felt claustrophobic, like they were pressing in around us. Every tree seemed to be hiding something. Every shadow seemed alive. We had agreed the night before that we would pack up and head out that morning. It felt cowardly to leave, like we were giving up over a bad smell and some trash in an old shack, but none of us wanted to risk another night there. My buddy kept brushing it off, saying it was probably just some homeless guy squatting, but even he had stopped sounding sure of himself. His girlfriend barely spoke at all, and when she did, it was usually to remind us how quickly we could get back to the car if we moved fast. As we were breaking camp, I noticed something strange near the fire pit. There were footprints in the dirt that had not been there the night before, bare footprints. They were small, too small to belong to any of us, and they circled around the camp in an uneven pattern. My skin went cold when I realized the prints led directly to the outhouse and back again. I almost said nothing, almost kept it to myself, but the fear pushed the words out before I could stop them. My friend followed my gaze, his face tightening when he saw them too. His girlfriend swore under her breath, throwing her gear into the car with shaking hands. We got out of there quickly. The drive back down the dirt road felt endless. every turn making me expect to see someone standing in the path ahead, but nothing happened. The trees eventually opened up, the smell faded, and I almost let myself believe it was over. The problem was, it did not end when we left. I got home late that night, exhausted and trying to forget the whole thing. I dumped my pack by the door, showered, and collapsed into bed. For the first time in days, I slept deeply. But when I woke the next morning, there was something sitting on my kitchen counter that made my blood run cold. It was a Polaroid. The picture showed me asleep in my bed. The angle was wrong for it to have been taken from the doorway or the hall. It looked like it had been snapped from the corner of the room, near my dresser. I searched the apartment top to bottom, every closet, every cabinet, nothing. The locks on the doors were still in place, the windows shut. But I could not explain how the photo had gotten there. I had not taken it. No one had a key to my apartment. I told myself maybe it was a sick joke. Maybe my buddy had taken it while we were camping and left it as a prank. That idea kept me calm enough to make it through the morning. But when I texted him later, he swore he knew nothing about it. His girlfriend backed him up, saying they had found something similar at their place too, a Polaroid left on their porch, showing the two of them asleep in their tent from the first night of the trip. The three of us met up that afternoon to talk it through. None of us wanted to say it out loud, but we all knew what it meant. Whoever had been living in that outhouse, they had followed us. Or maybe they had already been closer than we ever realized, watching us long before we found the shack. That night, I tried to stay awake. I sat in the living room with every light on, the television running just for the noise. Midnight came and went, then one, then two. At some point, my eyelids grew heavy, and I dozed off on the couch. When I woke up again, it was still dark, the clock reading a little past 4. The smell was there. That same heavy, sour rot from the woods, clinging to the air inside my apartment. My stomach turned as I realized it was strongest near the hallway, drifting from the direction of my bedroom. I grabbed a flashlight and moved slowly, heart pounding so hard it made my chest ache. The bedroom was empty, the window was locked, the closet held nothing but clothes. I almost convinced myself I was imagining it, that the smell was stuck in my nose from the trip. But when I turned back toward the hallway, I saw it. Another Polaroid. It was lying on the floor just outside the door, face down. I picked it up with shaking hands, flipping it over. This one showed me standing in the hallway, the same hallway I was in at that very moment. My breath caught. The angle was from behind me. I spun around, flashlight beam cutting through the dark. Nothing. Empty air, quiet walls. But the smell was stronger, so strong I gagged. I spent the rest of the night sitting in the bathroom with the door locked, the shower running just to drown out the silence. My phone sat on the sink, screen lighting up every so often with notifications I ignored. I could not bring myself to move. When morning came, I felt broken, like something in me had cracked. I called my buddy and told him everything. He sounded just as wrecked. Said he had woken up to his front door standing wide open, though he swore he had locked it before bed. He found muddy footprints in his kitchen, bare prints leading straight to the fridge, before turning back toward the door. His girlfriend was so shaken she refused to stay in the apartment another night. We all agreed we had to talk to someone about it. A ranger, the police, anyone. But deep down, I knew it would not matter. How do you explain Polaroids appearing in your apartment? How do you tell someone that the smell of rot is following you from a shack in the woods? They would think we were crazy, or worse, accuse us of making it all up. That night, I tried to be braver. I left the lights off, sat in the dark with a kitchen knife clutched in my hand, waiting. Hours dragged by. My nerves screamed with every sound, every creak of the building settling, but nothing happened. No smell, no photos, no intruder. By dawn, I almost felt foolish for being so afraid. And then I saw the note. It was not a Polaroid this time, just a scrap of paper, folded neatly and placed on my kitchen table. In shaky handwriting, only 3 words were scrawled across it. I see you. After I found the note on my table, everything in my apartment felt wrong. I stood there staring at those 3 words for so long that the clock ticked through an entire hour before I finally moved. The handwriting was uneven, like someone had scratched it down in a hurry, the letters leaning awkwardly as though the hand behind them had not written much before. It was enough to make my skin crawl. I checked the locks again, every window, every latch. I even pushed furniture in front of the door, though I knew it would not stop anyone determined enough to get in. The problem was not just that someone had been inside. It was that they had been close enough to my bed to take pictures of me sleeping, close enough to leave a note while I sat awake in the next room. The idea that they could come and go without me ever hearing was almost worse than if they had broken in loudly. My buddy called later that morning. His voice sounded ragged, and he admitted he had not slept at all. He had woken up to find his refrigerator open, food scattered across the floor. On the counter was another Polaroid, this one of him brushing his teeth. He swore he had been alone in the bathroom, yet the photo showed him from an angle behind his shoulder. The part that disturbed him the most was the reflection in the mirror. A shadowy shape stood in the doorway behind him, blurred but definitely human. His girlfriend had already packed a bag and left to stay with her parents. She wanted nothing more to do with it, and I could not blame her. But that left him and me, both shaken and unsure what to do. We debated calling the police again, but what could we say? Someone left photos in our homes? Someone might have been inside but left no trace. No fingerprints, no forced entry, nothing but pictures that could easily be dismissed as pranks. I told him about the note. He went quiet for a long moment, before muttering that maybe we had made a mistake going into that outhouse at all. The rest of the day passed in a haze. I tried to go about things normally, even forced myself to go to the grocery store, but every aisle felt like a trap, every shopper like a threat. I kept glancing over my shoulder, expecting to see someone standing too close, watching. I caught myself sniffing the air at random moments, searching for that heavy rot. It was not there at the store, but when I carried my bags inside my apartment again, the smell hit me immediately. It was stronger now, like it had seeped into the walls. I lit candles, sprayed cleaner, even opened the windows, but nothing helped. The stink just sat there, clinging to everything. That night, I set up a camera. It was an old handheld one I used for vacations, nothing fancy, but it had a timer and could record through the night. I propped it up on a shelf in the living room, pointed toward the hallway, hoping to catch something. Maybe I thought proof would make me feel less crazy. Maybe I just needed to know I was not imagining it all. I barely slept, tossing on the couch while the camera's red light blinked in the dark. Around 3 a.m, I heard it again. The cough. This time it was not faint. It came from the hallway, clear and ragged, followed by a shuffle like bare feet dragging across the floor. My blood turned cold. I clutched the knife I had been keeping by my side, but I did not move. I could not. My body locked up, every muscle rigid. The coughing stopped, then silence. I must have dozed off eventually, because the next thing I remember was sunlight streaming in through the windows. I jolted awake and rushed to the camera, hands shaking as I scrolled through the footage. For the first hour or so, it was nothing, just me pacing, sitting, lying down. Then, around 3:17, movement. A figure stepped into the frame. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light. The image was grainy, the figure more of a shadow than a person. But as it moved closer to the lens, details became clearer. The man was tall and gaunt, his clothes filthy and torn. His skin looked pale, almost gray, and his hair hung in greasy strands across his face. He stared directly into the camera for a long moment, then turned his head toward the couch where I slept. My breath caught as I watched. The man walked slowly, deliberately, into the living room. He stopped beside the couch, looking down at me. For nearly 5 full minutes, he just stood there, motionless, staring. Then he bent down, so close his face almost touched mine. I flinched, even though I knew it had already happened. And then he looked back at the camera. Not just a glance. He looked directly into it, his mouth twisting into a faint, crooked grin. He reached out and pressed one finger to his lips in a shushing gesture. Then the feed cut to static. I threw up right there in the kitchen sink. When I finally calmed down enough to call my buddy, my words came out broken and jumbled. He listened without interrupting, then said he had woken to find another Polaroid on his nightstand. This one showed him and his girlfriend asleep, though she had been gone for days. She was in the bed beside him, but her face looked wrong, pale, sunken, lifeless. He said he had ripped it up immediately, too terrified to keep it. We both knew then that leaving the campsite had not ended it. If anything, it had only brought it closer. I spent the rest of the day with my curtains drawn, knife never leaving my hand. Every creak of the building made me jump. Every sound from the street made me flinch. I checked the footage again and again, hoping I had imagined it, but the recording was always the same. The man, standing over me, the grin, the shushing finger. That night, I did not even try to sleep. When the clock ticked past 3, I sat frozen on the couch, waiting. The smell grew stronger, seeping from the hallway, curling into the living room like smoke. I stared into the dark until my eyes burned, but I could not see anything there. The silence pressed in, heavier with every second, and then came the scratching. Soft at first, like fingernails dragging across wood. It came from the hall closet, slow and deliberate, back and forth, back and forth. My throat tightened. I raised the knife, every nerve screaming at me to move, but my legs felt like lead. The scratching grew louder. Finally, I snapped. I lunged forward, yanked the closet door open, and shone my flashlight inside. Nothing. Just coats and shoes and boxes. But on the inside of the door, etched deep into the wood, were words scratched in shaky letters. I am here. I did not sleep at all after finding those words scratched into the closet door. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined a hand moving slowly in the dark, dragging nails across wood to carve that message. I kept replaying the footage from the night before, the way he had looked into the camera, how deliberate it was. This was not just someone hiding out and messing with us. He wanted us to know. He wanted me to feel him there. By morning I felt like a ghost myself, pale, shaking, running on fumes. I called my buddy again, and the first thing he said was that he was packing his things. He did not want to stay in his place another night. His girlfriend still would not come back, and now he was convinced the thing, whatever it was, had been standing right over him while he slept again. He said he had woken to the sound of someone breathing in his ear, but when he bolted upright, the room was empty. I asked if he had checked for more Polaroids. He paused, and that silence told me everything. He had found one. He just did not want to say what was on it. The two of us met later that day at a diner just off the highway. Neither of us had much of an appetite, just coffee cooling in our cups while we sat there, trying to figure out what to do. We agreed that calling the cops again was useless. What were we supposed to say? That a man who might not even exist was leaving us photos of ourselves in our homes? That he smelled like rot and left no evidence behind? It would sound insane. We tossed around the idea of leaving town, just getting in the car and driving until the tank was empty, starting fresh somewhere else. But even saying it out loud felt hollow. How do you run from something that is already inside your walls, already watching you while you sleep? It did not matter where we went. When I got back to my apartment that evening, I almost turned around and left again. The smell hit me as soon as I opened the door. It was suffocating now, thick and sour, like meat left in the sun for weeks. I gagged into my sleeve, tears stinging my eyes. The whole place felt poisoned. I opened the windows, turned on fans, tried everything to clear the air. Nothing worked. The smell was not fading anymore. It was rooted there, like the walls had soaked it in. By nightfall, I was running on nothing but nerves. I set the camera up again, this time pointing directly at my bed. I wanted to know for certain. I wanted proof. even if it killed me to see it. I lay awake for hours, staring into the dark, knife under my pillow, every sense straining. Around 3 again, it started. The scratching, but this time it was not from the closet. It came from under the bed. My heart stopped. The sound was slow, steady, deliberate, like fingers dragging across the floorboards. I could feel the mattress shift, just slightly, as though something pressed against it from below. I wanted to run, but I could not move. I lay there frozen, staring at the ceiling, convinced that if I looked over the side of the bed, I would see a face staring back. The scratching stopped. Silence filled the room so thick I could hear my own blood rushing in my ears. Then the mattress dipped near my feet, just a fraction, as though someone had placed their hand there. My throat closed. I wanted to scream, but nothing came out. At some point, exhaustion must have pulled me under, because I woke to sunlight burning through the blinds. The camera was still running, the battery almost dead. My hands shook as I replayed the footage. Around 3:17, the screen flickered. A shape crawled out from under the bed. It was him. The same gaunt figure, pale skin, greasy hair, moving on hands and knees like an animal. He climbed out slowly, limbs bending in ways that made my stomach twist. He stood beside the bed, watching me. Then he leaned closer, so close the lens caught every detail of his face, the hollow eyes, the cracked lips, the faint trace of a smile. And then, in the faintest rasp, I heard him say it again. "I am here." I slammed the laptop shut and nearly threw up. My whole body shook, adrenaline flooding me until I thought my heart would burst. That was when I decided I could not stay another night. I grabbed a bag, stuffed in clothes, my wallet, whatever I could reach. I left everything else behind. I drove to my parents' place 3 hours away, barely stopping for gas. For a moment it felt like a relief. Their house was familiar, safe. I sat with my mom in the kitchen, forcing a smile, pretending everything was fine. But then she wrinkled her nose and asked if something in my bag had spoiled. The smell had followed me. That night, I set up the camera again, this time in the guest room at their house. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, until I must have passed out from sheer exhaustion. In the morning, I checked the footage. At 3:17, the door to the guest room opened slowly. He stepped inside. Not rushed, not frantic. Calm, patient. He stood in the doorway for a long time before walking to the foot of the bed. His pale hand rested lightly on the blanket near my ankle. Then he crouched down, face tilted up toward the camera, and smiled. But the worst part was not that he had followed me. The worst part was the shape behind him. In the faint corner of the screen, half hidden in the doorway, another figure was standing. Taller, broader, with the same stillness, the same unnatural calm. My breath caught. My mind raced back to what my buddy had said. The thing he had not wanted to describe in his Polaroid. The way he had gone quiet. This was not just one man. We had not been dealing with a lone squatter. We had stumbled onto something bigger. I wish I could say I packed my things and left the country, or that I found some expert who had answers. But the truth is simpler and more pathetic. I froze. For days after seeing that second figure in the doorway, I could barely move. My parents went about their usual routines, asking me small questions about work or if I had been eating well, and I nodded and smiled and lied through my teeth while my insides twisted with fear. Every time I excused myself to the guest room, I double-checked the curtains, the closet, the locks. But none of it mattered. The footage was proof. They could get in anywhere, and they did not care that I knew. I kept thinking back to the campsite, to the smell around the outhouse, the coughing, the Polaroids. It seemed almost laughable now that I had thought it was just some disturbed person squatting. That was the most comfortable explanation, the one I had clung to until it split apart. Now I knew there was more than one of them, and they were not confined to a campsite in the woods. They had walked into my home, stood over me while I slept, followed me across the state, and had no trouble showing up under my parents' roof. The smell followed everywhere. That was one of the worst parts. I could see my mother wrinkle her nose as she walked past my door. She asked if something had spilled in my bag, but I told her no and left it at that. How do you explain that the rot is not in your clothes, not in the walls, but in the air itself, tied to something you cannot name? At night, it was unbearable. It seeped into my dreams until I woke gagging, eyes watering, sure that if I turned my head, I would see them crouched beside me. I told my buddy what I had seen in the footage. He went quiet for a long time, and then finally admitted he had been seeing more than one for weeks. He had hoped it was just paranoia, shadows playing tricks. But he had found Polaroids in his apartment showing 2 figures, sometimes 3. Always blurry, always just at the edge of the frame, but real enough to make his skin crawl. When he said that, something inside me broke. I realized there was no end to it. We had stumbled into something we were never supposed to see, and now it had marked us. Whether it was people or something less human, it did not matter. They were watching. They had been living under floors and inside walls, and the outhouse was only one of their many hiding spots. I stayed another 2 nights at my parents' place before I left. I could not risk them. The second morning, my mother found a Polaroid slid under the back door. It was a photo of the 3 of us eating dinner at the table the night before. My father laughed it off, said maybe one of my old friends was playing a prank, but I saw his hand shake as he set the picture down. I knew then I had to go. I drove without a plan, just kept heading west until the tank ran out. I bought a cheap motel room and stayed there, curtains drawn, knife on the nightstand. I set up the camera again, though part of me already knew what it would show. The footage started the same way it always did. Empty room, nothing moving but me shifting under the blanket. Then, just after 3 in the morning, the door opened. He stepped in first, the thin one with greasy hair and gray skin, then another figure, taller, broader, followed behind him, and then another. 3 of them stood in the room. They did not move at first. They just stood there watching me sleep. Then one bent down and placed something on the floor beside the bed. In the faint light, I saw it was a Polaroid. After a long while, they turned toward the camera. All 3 leaned close, faces pressed together, eyes locked on the lens. Then the screen went black. When I woke in the morning, the photo was there on the carpet, just as the video showed. It was a picture of me lying in bed with 3 shadows surrounding me. But in this version, my eyes were open, wide and staring straight into the camera. I stopped recording after that. I stopped talking to my buddy too. He kept calling, but I could not answer. I did not want to hear him describe more Polaroids, more faces. It was bad enough knowing what I knew. Hearing him confirm it would only drive it deeper into my bones. I do not bother pretending to live normally anymore. I keep moving, never staying more than a week in one place. Sometimes I wake to the smell in a new room before I have even unpacked. Sometimes I find Polaroids waiting for me when I check in. The staff will swear they did not leave anything, but the pictures are always there. The worst is the silence. They do not speak much, only that rasp I heard the first night. Sometimes, though, when I am right on the edge of sleep, I hear whispering. It is never clear, never words I can make out, but it fills the room like a tide. I lie there with my eyes shut, pretending not to notice, too afraid to move. Because if I move, I know they will know I am awake. I think back to the outhouse sometimes, how stupid it was to force the door, to look inside, to treat it like some creepy adventure. I remember the smell, the cough, the Polaroids scattered across the floor. We could have left right then. We should have. But we lingered. We looked too long, and that was all it took. I do not know how long I can keep this up. I am not writing this to get advice or sympathy. I know there is nothing anyone can do. I am only writing it down because part of me needs someone else to carry the weight of knowing, even for a moment. Maybe then I will not feel so alone. But the truth is, I am never alone, not anymore. Even now, As I type this, I can smell it thick in the air. That rotten, heavy stench pressing against my lungs. And I can hear it too, faint scratching just under the bed. I have not looked yet. I am afraid if I do, I will see more than one pair of eyes staring back. I do not know how this ends. I do not know if it ever will. But I am tired, and I am scared, and I cannot shake the thought that this is not just about me or my friend. That there are more outhouses, more closets, more hidden spaces where they wait for someone curious enough to look inside. And if you ever smell something foul where it should not be, if you ever hear coughing in a place that is supposed to be empty, do not open the door. Do not go inside, because once you do, they never leave. We weren't hardcore campers or anything. We'd gone maybe 3 times total, me, Claire. A beat-up tent we borrowed from her brother, and a little propane stove that always smelled slightly like melted plastic. It was mostly about unplugging for the weekend. No service, no emails, no deadlines breathing down our necks. Just trees, firewood, canned chili, and the occasional raccoon bold enough to stare you down for a granola bar. That's what we were expecting when we drove out to Pine Brook State Forest that Friday. We picked the site ahead of time. Lot 23, close enough to the trailheads but far enough from the ranger station that it felt like actual wilderness. There were only 2 other vehicles in the entire loop when we pulled in a rust-colored Subaru with bike racks and this old white van. I remember noticing it right away, mostly because it didn't match the vibe. No campground sticker, no windows except the windshield, just these gray curtains pulled tight behind the glass. Not even a single dent or decal to tell you anything about the driver. Claire made a face when we passed it. "Creeper van," she muttered. "Maybe it's just a solo hiker," I said, "or someone doing the off-grid thing." "Without registering?" she asked. I didn't have an answer for that. We didn't dwell on it, though. Not right away. We set up camp, got the fire going, cracked a couple beers, and made a sad attempt at toasting hot dogs over 2 small flames. Typical first night stuff. When the sun went down, the forest went quiet in that way you forget it can. No sirens, no cars, just the occasional crack of a branch and the distant call of an owl. The van was still sitting there, 2 sites over, but we didn't hear a door open, didn't see a flashlight flicker, nothing, like it was just a prop someone left behind. By the time we crawled into the tent, I'd stopped thinking about it. Claire hadn't. "I swear it hasn't moved since we got here," she whispered, pulling the sleeping bag up to her chin. "Maybe they're just a heavy sleeper," I said. "Half asleep already." She didn't laugh. "Do you think we should have told the ranger?" "What would we say? There's a weird van at a campsite?" "Yeah, pretty much." I shifted onto my side and pulled her in closer. "If it's still there tomorrow, we'll check with them, okay?" She nodded against my chest. Neither of us brought it up the next morning. The van was still there, parked at an angle like it had just coasted into the lot and died. No footprints in the dirt around it, no smoke from a fire. It looked exactly the same, silent, shut. We went for a hike that day, nothing crazy, just a 4-mile loop through a mossy ridge trail that smelled like wet pine needles and took us past some gorgeous overlooks. The kind of walk that usually wrings out your anxiety. But every time I stopped to catch my breath, I caught Claire looking behind us. Not ahead. Behind. That night we ate by lantern light. The fire didn't catch like it had the first night, too damp, too rushed. Neither of us really tried. There was a tension sitting between us that we hadn't spoken out loud yet, but it filled the air like smoke anyway. Around 11, we zipped up the tent and settled in. It was colder that night. The wind came in off the ridge, brushing against the tent walls with soft, shivery pressure. I woke up to the sound of something stepping on dry branches. Not a deer. I know what deer sound like. They're skittish, light on their feet. Whatever this was had weight. I sat up slowly, trying not to make noise, and pressed my hand to Claire's arm. She was already awake, staring at the nylon above us like she could see through it. "Did you hear it?" she whispered. "Yeah." It came again. 2 steps, then silence. I unzipped the tent as quietly as I could and stuck my head out. Nothing. Just the fire pit, now dark, our cooler, the outline of our car. The van was gone. I blinked and leaned further out. Its sight was empty. No tire tracks, no light, no shape. Just the damp gravel lot, hollow and quiet. "Where the hell did it go?" Claire asked, crawling out behind me. "I don't know." We stood there in our socks, breath visible in the cold, both of us turning in slow circles like we were afraid to look in any one direction too long. I felt completely exposed. No locks, no doors. Just canvas and mesh, and the hope that whoever had been nearby wasn't still watching. We didn't sleep the rest of the night. Claire sat cross-legged in the tent, holding the flashlight, while I stayed zipped into my sleeping bag with my pocket knife gripped in one hand like I'd be able to do anything with it. When dawn broke, we didn't even talk about packing. It just happened. We took down the tent in record time, tossed everything into the car, and peeled out of the campsite like something was going to chase us if we stayed 1 second longer. The ranger station was a small log cabin near the park entrance. We pulled in, both of us looking half feral after a night of no sleep and adrenaline. The ranger on duty was maybe in his mid-50s, baseball cap, radio clipped to his vest, seemed surprised to see us. "You two heading out early?" he asked. "There was a white van parked near our site," I said, skipping the small talk. "No plates, curtains in the window. It was there when we got in Friday. It was gone when we checked last night." His face shifted slightly, not surprise, more like caution. "Which site?" 21, I said. "We were at 23. He checked his clipboard. "No one registered for that lot all weekend." I looked at Claire. Her arms were folded tightly across her chest. "I thought you needed a pass," she said. "You do," he replied, slow and deliberate. "And if it wasn't marked on here, they weren't supposed to be out there." We waited for him to say more, call someone, take a note. But he didn't. Later that afternoon, just before we left the park boundaries, Claire asked to walk back to the site. I didn't want to, but I didn't argue. Maybe we both needed closure. The van was still gone. The site looked undisturbed. No trash, no firewood, nothing. But just behind the tree line, half buried under pine needles and blackened dirt, we found the fire pit. Still warm. Inside, a few scorched zippers, part of a canvas strap, and what looked like the melted back panel of a plastic backpack. It was small, too small for an adult, and next to it, half covered in ash, was the edge of a knife blade. Claire didn't say anything. Neither did I. We just turned around and walked back to the car, and we haven't been camping since. We didn't talk much on the drive home. Not even during the stretch of highway that usually had us playing road trip games, joking about pit stops, or ranking which gas station chains had the best snacks. It was like the weight of that van, that place, still sat somewhere in the car with us, and if we said too much, we'd remind it we were there. Claire kept staring out the window with her arms crossed, but I knew she wasn't looking at anything specific, just moving her eyes so her thoughts didn't eat her alive. I was doing the same thing behind the wheel, trying to focus on the lines on the road, the hum of tires, anything that felt predictable. We were an hour out from home when she finally spoke. "That fire pit," she said, still not looking at me. "Did it look fresh to you?" I nodded. Yeah, still warm. Wood hadn't gone out completely. She bit her lip. "So they left after us, or were still there while we were packing." That silence came back, heavier this time. We didn't fill it. When we got home, we did something we'd never done after a trip. We unpacked everything immediately. Tent, sleeping bags, clothes, all of it came out of the car and into the wash or the storage bins before we even sat down. I think we both wanted to scrub the whole experience off ourselves, like maybe if we cleaned fast enough, we wouldn't have to remember it the next day. It didn't work. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about the way the dirt around the fire pit had been disturbed, like someone tried to cover the items in a hurry, or maybe they weren't trying to hide it at all. Maybe it was a message. Claire tried to sleep, but gave up around 2. I heard her walking around the apartment, pausing at each window, checking the door chain even though we'd already locked it. I didn't say anything. I just laid in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the occasional creak of the floorboards. The next morning, she had her laptop open before I even made coffee. She was already on the park's website, trying to figure out if there'd been any recent incidents reported in Pine Brook. I sat beside her and refreshed the local news pages on my phone. It felt dumb at first, like we were playing detective for something that could have just been a creepy coincidence, but it didn't feel dumb for long. Claire found it first. A missing persons flyer buried 3 clicks deep on a Facebook page for Pine Brook's volunteer search and rescue group. 10-year-old girl, missing since June, last seen at a roadside gas station 2 towns over. She'd been with her mother. They were traveling cross-country. Security footage showed the girl going into the bathroom and never coming out. "Is that the same backpack?" Claire asked, her voice quiet. I leaned in. It was hard to tell from the grainy image, but the shape of it, the plastic front with the cartoon character, the same color, it matched what we'd seen in the fire pit. Burned, melted, but unmistakable. We didn't speak for a long time. Around noon, I made the decision. We should call it in. Claire looked at me. To who? The local police, maybe, or the rangers. "And tell them what?" she asked. "That we saw a van? That it vanished? That we found a half-burned kid's backpack in the woods?" "Yes." She didn't answer. But she didn't stop me either. I pulled up the ranger station number and called. The guy who answered didn't sound like the same one from the weekend, but his tone shifted the second I started describing where we'd been. I gave him the site number, told him what we'd seen, the van, the fire pit, the items inside it. There was a long pause after I finished. "You say the van didn't have plates?" he asked. "No front or back. And it was parked at Site 21? "Yeah." Another pause. "We've had a few reports like that," he said, his voice quieter now. "Not always at the same site, but close, same description. Old van, white, no plates, always gone before we get there." I gripped the phone tighter. "And the fire pit?" "We'll send someone out to take a look. If it's on park property, we'll flag it." That was it. No more questions, no urgency. Just vague acknowledgement and a promise to flag it. I thanked him and hung up, staring at the phone screen until it dimmed in my hand. Claire walked over, holding her laptop. "There are 6 posts like the one we found," she said. "Same area, all within the last year. Kids, teens, even a couple adults. No confirmed sightings, no leads." She flipped the screen toward me. "These ones were last seen near the interstate off Route 47. That's where we exited to get into Pine Brook." I scrolled through the images. One girl had braids and a pink jacket. Another boy wore a t-shirt with a baseball team I recognized. All smiling, all looking like they had no idea what was waiting for them just a few miles down the road. "We need to tell someone else," I said. "Who?" she asked again, but softer this time. Not because she didn't believe me, because she did. That's what made it worse. That night, the dreams started. I saw the van again parked, silent, facing the forest. I was standing just outside its back doors. They were open. Inside was black, too dark to see, but I could hear something breathing. Not loud, not angry, just waiting. I woke up sweating, the room too hot even with the fan on. Claire was already awake. "I dreamed I was back at the site," she said, "but it wasn't ours. It was the one with the van. The fire pit was gone, but there was something sticking out of the ground. Just the edge of a blanket." We didn't talk about it the rest of the day. But I kept refreshing the missing persons pages. I don't know what I was looking for, some confirmation, a face that would link it all together, or maybe just proof that we weren't going insane. What we found instead came 2 days later. Not from the Park Service, not from the police, but from a comment on a thread buried deep in a forum about strange encounters in national parks. It was one line, posted anonymously. "The van doesn't follow you. It waits for you to come back." And suddenly I realized something that hadn't occurred to me until right then. We left the forest. But we never actually left the story. 3 nights passed without sleep that actually meant anything. Claire tried melatonin. I tried whiskey. Neither worked. At best, we drifted into shallow half-dreams. At worst, we stared at the ceiling until sunrise, watching shadows shift across the walls. By Tuesday, I stopped checking the forums. My head was a mess. Too much scrolling. Too many stories. Everyone had a theory. A few even sounded like ours, old vehicles showing up where they shouldn't, no license plates, people watching from inside, but none of them ended with any kind of clarity, just more questions. The posts always faded off, or were deleted, or worse, the original poster stopped replying entirely. Claire had a different strategy. She printed everything, notes, maps, screenshots. She had this ugly manila folder she carried around now like it was homework for a class she never signed up for. "This isn't just paranoia," she said Thursday morning, flipping through it. "There's a pattern." "I believe you." She looked up, surprised. "I mean it," I said. "I'm just not sure what believing it even does anymore." We were both quiet for a minute. Then she slid a photo across the table. The same girl from the missing flyer, 10 years old, backpack on. Same one we'd seen charred in the pit. But the photo Claire showed me wasn't from the flyer. It was newer. "I found this on a Reddit post," she said. "Some guy talking about trail cam footage he got last month." "Wait, last month?" "Yeah, from the Ridge Point entrance, northwest edge of Pine Brook." I looked again. It was grainy, black and white, but her outline was clear. Hair tied back, same shoes. She was walking through the trees. Alone. No timestamp, no context, just the photo. "That can't be real," I said. "She's been missing since June." Claire's voice was flat. "I think that van is taking people who are never meant to be found. We made the mistake of talking about it in front of someone else." Friday night, we were out for drinks with Claire's sister and her fiancé. We were trying to be normal again. Claire was picking at her fries. I was nursing a beer that had gone warm 20 minutes ago. Somehow, the conversation turned to camping. "You guys still going out to the woods every other weekend?" her sister asked, smiling. Claire looked at me, then back at her. "Not lately." "Oh, you gotta come out with us sometime," the fiancé said. "We just found a spot up near Westfield, real quiet. No cell towers, no one for miles." Claire didn't even blink. That's kind of the problem. And before I could steer it somewhere else, she started talking about Pine Brook, the van, the missing kid, everything. Her sister's fiancé chuckled halfway through. Not a mocking laugh, more like polite confusion. "You mean like an urban legend?" Claire stared at him. "We saw the backpack. It was burned. Someone buried it." He tried to recover, raising his hands. "No, I believe you saw something. It's just..." He glanced at me. "Come on. You don't really think someone's driving around national parks stealing people in a creepy van and no one notices?" "I didn't either," I said quietly, "until it happened." The mood tanked after that. We didn't stay much longer. When we got home, Claire didn't even take her shoes off. She went straight to the kitchen and started pulling out boxes, the ones we hadn't touched since we moved in. Old photos, receipts, printouts from earlier research. I followed her in. "What are we doing?" She paused, one hand in the box. "If the cops won't investigate it, we need to," she said. "Claire, we're not detectives. We're barely functioning adults." She pulled something out and held it up. A Pine Brook trail map. Marked in red was our site 23, then 21, where the van had been, and about a half-mile west, a sharp X. "What's that?" She tapped it. Where I think the van came from. There's no road on the map, but when we were hiking, remember that overgrown path? It looked like tire ruts, just faint. I did remember. She grabbed her phone and pulled up satellite view. There it was, barely visible, but a dirt stretch curling off the main road, vanishing into the tree line. I think there's something back there, she said. A shed, a cabin, something they use. I stared at her. You want to go back? Not want, she said, but yeah. I didn't say anything right away. But I felt it too. That tension that doesn't let go of your spine. The one that says you've seen something you weren't supposed to, and if you walk away now, you'll never know how deep the hole goes. We planned it that night. One day, in and out. No camping, no wandering. Just enough to find out if we were crazy or not. We left Saturday at sunrise. No bags, just flashlights, gloves, and a portable scanner Claire borrowed from a coworker who used it for geocaching. It was supposed to pick up metal or signs of tampering in the ground. We weren't sure it'd help, but it made us feel like we had a purpose. We parked a mile from Pine Brook's main entrance, walked the rest of the way through a back trail. The weather was cold, dry. The kind that made your breath visible and your fingers go numb by the time you'd zipped your coat. When we got to Lot 23, everything was as we'd left it. Empty. We didn't stop. We followed the trail for about 10 minutes before Claire spotted the turnoff. The ruts were there. Faint, overgrown with brush and moss, but there. She looked at me, then started walking. We didn't talk much after that. The path curved sharply left, then widened into a shallow clearing. And there it was. A van. Not the van, at least not visibly the same. This one had been there for a while, covered in pine needles and rust, tires deflated, back doors sealed shut with what looked like an old bike chain. Claire walked around it once, slowly. She tapped the scanner near the base of the back doors. It chirped. Then she scanned the ground nearby. Another ping. She dropped to her knees and started brushing away the leaves. And there, buried in a shallow impression in the dirt, was another fire pit, long dead, but inside it half-melted toys, a phone case, what looked like the edge of a shoe. Children's sighs. Claire stood up, hands shaking. This wasn't just one person, she said. I felt something then. Not fear. Something worse. Like we were too close to something we had no business finding. Like the trees around us were suddenly listening. And maybe, just maybe, the van we saw hadn't ever really left. We didn't speak on the walk back, not at first. Claire had her phone out, snapping photos of the van, the fire pit, even the tire ruts in the dirt. She moved with this steady, determined calm I hadn't seen in her since the day after the original trip. Like the second she knelt down and uncovered that fire pit, something inside her clicked into place. Not fear, not panic, just clarity. Me? I kept looking over my shoulder. There was this feeling I couldn't shake, like we weren't supposed to have found any of it. That we'd wandered somewhere we weren't meant to go, and now the forest had noticed. Not in a supernatural way. Just eyes. People, watching, waiting. We got back to the main trail around noon. Still no signs of rangers, no other hikers, no campers, and no van in Lot 21. Either the spot it had been parked at a week earlier. It was all too quiet. When we reached the car, Claire slid into the passenger seat without saying a word and started uploading the photos to a cloud folder, marking each one by timestamp and GPS data. She'd been using an offline mapping app that logged everything. She was methodical like that, the kind of person who highlighted books and kept receipts. I didn't start the car yet. Instead, I sat there gripping the steering wheel, staring through the windshield at the same trees we'd stared at the first time we pulled in. "We're not done, are we?" I asked. Claire didn't look up, not even close. When we got home, she contacted the families. She didn't tell me right away, just started sending messages through social media, carefully worded and direct. She said if she were them, she'd want to know. That maybe they'd been waiting for someone to say, "Hey, I saw something," even if it didn't change the outcome. I watched from the hallway while she typed. Her shoulders were tense, focused. I knew better than to interrupt. 2 responded that night. One thanked her, said the police had stopped updating them months ago. The other asked for copies of the photos. The 3rd reply came the next day, different tone, nervous, almost like they were afraid to say too much over a direct message. Claire read it out loud. "We saw the same van when our son went missing. No one believed us. It was in the parking lot that day, windows blacked out. My husband tried to take a photo, but the driver sped off. No plates." She paused, then whispered the next part. "They come back." We went to the police. It felt ridiculous, walking into a station with printed screenshots and trail maps. We expected rolled eyes, maybe even a polite "we'll look into it" before getting brushed off. But what we got was worse. The officer at the front desk barely let us finish before holding up his hand. "You're not the first," he said. Claire and I exchanged a look. He leaned forward. "You think this is the first time someone's come in here with stories about that forest? People talk. People come in shaking, pale, saying they saw something. But no one brings proof." Claire slid the stack of photos across the desk. He glanced at them, mouth twitching like he didn't want to admit he was interested. "What do you want us to do with this?" "Investigate," Claire said flatly. "Go to the site, check the van. That pit had children's items in it." He tapped the stack once, then exhaled. "I'll pass it along," he said, "but off the record, this kind of thing doesn't go anywhere, not unless it's happening in someone's backyard or goes viral. And even then, it gets buried fast." Claire's jaw tightened. "Why?" He hesitated, then said something that stuck with me more than anything else. "Because it's cleaner to pretend these people never existed than to admit we lost them." That night, I couldn't sit still. Claire was organizing her files again, posting in online forums under an alias, tagging news outlets, even starting a private thread to compile other stories. Meanwhile, I was pacing. Every time I passed the living room window, I checked the street. Nothing. But I kept checking anyway. Finally, around 2 a.m., I stepped outside. No sounds, no cars. The kind of silence you only hear right before something breaks it. I walked to the curb and stood there, looking up and down the road. And that's when I saw it. Headlights, far end of the block, just sitting there, not moving. I narrowed my eyes. White. I walked back inside without saying anything to Claire. The lights were gone by the time I looked out the window again. The next morning there was an envelope on our doorstep. No name, no return address. Just a single photo inside. It was us. Me and Claire, from behind, in the woods. Taken from a distance, like through brush. I stared at it for a long time before flipping it over. On the back, written in tiny black ink, were the words, "You're looking too hard." Claire stood behind me, reading over my shoulder. She didn't speak, just reached out, took the photo, and placed it inside her folder. Then she locked the deadbolt on the front door and pulled the curtains shut. We stopped going out much after that. Groceries were done late at night, no more hikes, no more back roads. If we didn't have to be somewhere, we weren't. Claire set up a camera at the front door, then the back, then 2 more for the windows. We changed our route to work, changed our phones, changed passwords. But still, once, while taking the trash out, I found a cigarette butt tucked under the edge of our doormat. We don't smoke. Another time, Claire swore someone had gone through her car, nothing missing, just the glove box left open. Whatever this was, whoever they were, they wanted us to know they were close. But they also wanted us to stop. Weeks passed. The police never followed up. None of the forums responded to Claire's thread. One of the families we spoke to deleted their social media altogether. It was like someone had hit a reset button on the whole thing, scrubbing it clean, pretending it never happened. I wanted to stop thinking about it, wanted to pretend we'd just imagined the worst. But late one night, I walked out to the porch and sat in the dark. No phone, no flashlight. Just me and the quiet. And after a few minutes, I realized something that chilled me more than the photo, more than the fire pit, more than the officer's warning. The forest wasn't following us. We were still in it. It was about 3 in the morning when I woke up to the sound of Claire moving around in the kitchen. She wasn't trying to be quiet, but she also wasn't loud. Cabinet doors opened slowly, closed gently. Drawers sliding open in little bursts. I laid there listening for a minute before calling out. "What are you doing?" She didn't answer at first. Then I heard the fridge open and close, followed by the rustle of paper, maybe foil, maybe something in a bag. I sat up. "Claire." She came into the room a second later, hair a mess, eyes wide but unfocused, like she hadn't slept at all, like she hadn't stopped moving long enough to try. She held something in her hand, a printout. "There's another one," she said. It took me a second to process. Another what? Post, same van, same area, just uploaded 20 minutes ago. I took it from her. It was a screenshot of a Facebook post from someone named Greg L. The photo was blurry, taken through a window, probably a moving car, but unmistakable. The van was there, white, windowless, same size. No plates, parked along a fire road on the edge of Pine Brook. The caption was short. Saw this van parked near Trailhead 9. No one inside. Creeped me out. Left fast. I handed it back to her. This is recent. Yeah. And guess what? She said, turning back toward her laptop. That trailhead wasn't even open last time we were there. It was blocked off for maintenance. I pulled the blanket around my shoulders and followed her. On the screen, she had a map open, side by side with satellite view. There was the trailhead deep on the northwest edge of the park, just past a bend in the river trail. According to Claire, it had been closed due to flooding over the summer. They reopened it last week, she said, quietly, no announcement, just removed the barriers. And that's where it showed up. She nodded. We stared at the screen together. Then she clicked to another tab, one I hadn't seen before. It was a shared spreadsheet. Names, dates, locations, notes. You made a list, I said quietly. I've been keeping track of everything, every mention, every story. It's always near a trailhead, always off-season, always no plates. I scrolled through the entries. There were over 30. This is more than I thought, I said. It's more than anyone thinks, she replied, because no one's putting the pieces together. By sunrise, we'd decided. We were going back. Not to hike, not to camp, not even to wander near the sites we'd been to before. Just to watch. To sit near Trailhead 9 with a camera and a pair of binoculars and see what showed up. Maybe we'd catch a license plate, maybe a face, maybe nothing. But we had to go. We left that afternoon. Claire packed like she was prepping for a stakeout, camera batteries, snacks, extra SD cards. She'd even borrowed a long-lens DSLR from her coworker for wildlife photography, which wasn't technically a lie. I drove. The closer we got, the quieter it became inside the car. No music. Just the occasional highway noise and the soft sound of Claire flipping through her notes again, double-checking details she already knew by heart. We parked half a mile from the trailhead, near a stretch of road that curved around a ridge and offered a clear view of the lot. There were no other cars, just a wide gravel loop half covered in leaves. Claire set up the camera in the back seat, pointing through the windshield. I kept my eyes on the trail entrance. We waited. An hour passed. Then 2. Still nothing. Claire tapped her pen against the armrest. This is how it always happens, she said. They don't come when you're watching. They came before, I said. Because we weren't looking. The sun dipped lower behind the trees. The air got colder. I turned on the car heater for a few minutes, trying not to fog up the windows. Then, just as the sky started to go gray, Claire leaned forward. There. I followed her gaze. The van. Coming from the north, slow and deliberate, like it wasn't in a hurry. No headlights, no markings, just white metal against the fall colors. It turned into the lot, rolled halfway through, then backed into a spot with the rear facing the tree line. From our distance, we couldn't see inside, couldn't make out the driver. But the camera caught it all. Claire clicked the shutter, then again and again, until the van disappeared behind the tree cover. We waited another hour. No one got out. No one got in. It just sat there. And then just like that it pulled out and drove off. Back the way it came. Gone. Claire leaned back in her seat and let out a breath she'd been holding for way too long. "We got it," she said. "That's the van." I nodded. "Now what?" She turned toward me, eyes locked on mine. "Now we find out where it goes." We followed at a distance, just enough to keep it in view without drawing attention. It turned onto a fire road unmarked, then kept going. Eventually, it led to another clearing, not the one we'd found last time, a different spot. More remote. There were signs of a campsite, old fire ring, patches of disturbed dirt, and a tarp. Folded. Stained. Claire took more photos. Then she crouched and pulled something from the leaves. A shoe. Kid's size again. She didn't speak. Neither did I. Just then, a sound faint but unmistakable. A snap. A branch. We turned together. In the shadows of the trees, just past the tarp, someone was standing. Watching. Not moving, not speaking. Just there. Claire grabbed my arm, and we backed away slowly, keeping our eyes forward, not turning our backs. When we finally got to the car, I fumbled the keys, hands shaking. We drove. Fast. Didn't stop until we hit pavement again. Claire's hands were clenched white around the camera. "We're not making this up," she said. "I know. And if we are..." She trailed off. We didn't finish that sentence. It was almost a month before we went back. Not because we wanted to, not even because we thought we'd be safer, but because something changed, something that didn't make sense and wouldn't leave us alone. It started with Claire's phone. She kept all the evidence we'd gathered stored on the cloud, every photo, every screenshot, even audio recordings of conversations we'd had about it. She backed them up twice, one local, one online. The folder was titled something vague, so it wouldn't stand out. But one morning, while doing routine checks, she noticed it was gone. Not corrupted, not deleted by accident, gone. The physical hard drive wouldn't open. The files showed empty, like they'd never been there. When she went to log into the cloud backup, the account had been locked due to unusual activity. When she finally got back in, the folder was there, but every single file had been replaced with a blank image named 404 JPG. That was when we knew. It wasn't just the van. It was whoever was behind it, watching, scrubbing, closing every door we opened. So we made a decision. We'd go back to the woods. One last time. Not to chase the van, not to get revenge, but to bury it all, the fear, the obsession in something solid, proof that wouldn't vanish with a power outage. We bought a disposable film camera, no GPS, no connection. We'd photograph what we could and leave the prints in a safe deposit box under Claire's cousin's name. She didn't even know we were doing it. That was the point. If anything happened to us, if everything got wiped again, the truth would still exist somewhere else. We returned on a Tuesday. Middle of the day, overcast skies, just enough cloud cover to keep most hikers away. We parked in the same lot as before, only this time we didn't go near our old site. We followed the overgrown trail again, the same one that led to the abandoned van, the shallow fire pit, and whatever else had been half buried in that forgotten stretch of forest. But the van was gone. Not just gone, erased. No rust stains on the ground, no tire ruts. The grass had grown back where we'd walked just weeks earlier, like nothing had been there in years. The fire pit was gone too, covered, smoothed out. Someone or something had been through. Maybe it was never there, I whispered, already knowing that wasn't true. Claire didn't reply. She took out the film camera and snapped a photo anyway, of the clearing, of the tree line, of the spot where we remembered it all happening. Even if we can't prove what it was, she said, her voice steady, we can prove something was here. We hiked deeper, following instinct more than map. Claire noticed at first the smell. Rotting wood, wet metal, something sour underneath it all. It led us to a shed. Not big, just enough for 1 or 2 people to stand in, half covered in moss, almost hidden beneath a fallen pine. The door was locked with a rusted padlock. I checked the edges, gave the handle a pull. It didn't budge. Claire raised the camera again. Just as she clicked the shutter, something moved behind us. I turned. Nothing. No footsteps, no birds, not even the usual hum of bugs. It was the kind of silence you feel, not hear. Claire whispered, "Let's go." And we did. We didn't run. We walked, slow and even, never looking back. Because deep down, we both knew if we turned around, we wouldn't be alone. We drove straight from Pinebrook to the photo lab. We paid in cash, using fake names we'd joked about years ago, inside jokes that suddenly didn't feel funny anymore. The technician said the prints would be ready in 24 hours. We didn't sleep that night, not out of fear, just this tight humming alertness that never dipped low enough to allow rest. The next day, the photos were ready. They were clear, unaltered, tangible. The clearing, the trees, the shed. A few of them showed faint impressions in the grass, like something heavy had once sat there. Claire sorted the photos carefully, choosing half to go into the deposit box, the rest to be stored at her aunt's house in a locked filing cabinet, buried behind decades of old tax paperwork. We didn't post them. We didn't try to contact journalists. Not again. Instead, we made peace with something harder. We'd carry this story. Just us. Just the truth we knew, without proof, the world would accept. And that was enough. It had to be. The next week we moved. Not far, just out of the city and into a quieter part of the county where the neighbors didn't ask questions and the nights didn't echo quite as loud. We didn't talk about Pinebrook much after that. We went back to work, went out sometimes, laughed when we could, though the laughter always felt a little thinner than before. But we were okay. Changed, yeah, but alive. Some nights, the woods still followed us in our dreams, and once in a while I'd swear I saw a white van parked a few blocks away from our new place. Not every day, just enough to remind me. I never approached it, and it always disappeared by morning. A year later, we got a letter. No return address, no stamp. Inside was a photograph. It was us, standing outside the shed. Same moment Claire had taken the picture. Only this one had been taken from behind, at an angle neither of us could have captured. No note, no signature, just the photo. We didn't panic, we didn't scream. Claire placed the photo in a sealed envelope and added it to the box in the deposit vault. No one else would understand what it meant. But we did. They were done chasing us because we had stopped chasing them. We never went back to Pine Brook. And maybe that's what kept us safe. Some doors, once opened, don't close easily. Some forests remember your footsteps no matter how lightly you tread. But if there's one thing we learned, it's this. When you see a van with no plates, curtains drawn tight, parked where it shouldn't be, don't look for the driver. Don't wait for the lights. Don't try to find the story behind it. Just leave. Because the moment you start asking questions, you're already part of the answer. It all came to a head because of a typo. Claire was reviewing her notes, something she'd done probably 100 times by now, and realized she'd miswritten one of the trail cam coordinates. She pulled up the satellite view again and zoomed in farther than she had before. The path didn't just lead to that abandoned van in the woods. There was something else. A clearing deeper in, about 30 yards beyond the van site, barely visible from the angle we'd approached it from the first time, but it was there, flat ground, something buried beneath the brush. Maybe a structure, or the remains of one. We had a choice, leave it alone, or go back one last time. We went, not out of obsession, out of necessity, because the next time might not come with a warning, and we were done waiting for permission. We told no one. Left our phones at home, wrote a note with the GPS coordinates and left it in the glove box of my car, in case something happened. Paranoia? Maybe, but we'd earned that. It took us 2 hours of hiking to reach the clearing. The terrain was harder than before. Roots, dense brambles, overgrowth thick enough that Claire had to pull her scarf over her mouth just to keep the debris out. And then the trees broke, and we saw it. It wasn't a cabin or shack. It was a pit, roughly the size of a single car, dug into the earth and partially collapsed on one side. On the other, thin metal rods jutted out, maybe the foundation of something old, maybe just rebar. There were signs of past fire, same as before. Scorched dirt, blackened stone, charred metal scraps. Claire was the first to move. She knelt near the edge and started digging gently with her gloves. After maybe 10 minutes, her hand hit something hard. Not stone, not wood, plastic. She unearthed it slowly, a lid to a storage bin, melted slightly but still intact. Inside were fragments of clothing, strips of faded fabric, a pair of small shoes, a Ziploc bag with a photo half curled inside, a girl in a school uniform smiling awkwardly at the camera. I didn't recognize her. Claire did. She was in one of the posts, she said, a year ago. Virginia. Not even from this state. We both sat back, quiet. There was no longer any question. This wasn't isolated. This wasn't one person or one van. It was a system, a rotating method, a trap that moved through parks and forests like a drifting shadow, not staying long enough to leave proof, just long enough to take. And they were counting on no one looking too closely. We brought everything we found to the authorities. But this time we didn't go local. We went federal. Claire sent a packet directly to the FBI, not the general tip line, but an actual agent she tracked down from a national task force on missing persons. She included everything: photos, coordinates, timelines, even the map overlays. Then we waited. And for the first time in months, someone responded. They showed up 2 weeks later. 2 unmarked sedans, federal IDs, real agents. They asked a lot of questions about the van, about the clearing, about how we'd gotten involved. They took our original folder, scanned our trail maps, and asked us not to speak to media just yet. Claire asked them point blank, "Is this part of something bigger?" The older agent, the one who hadn't said much until then, looked at us for a long moment. "There's more like you," he said finally. "People who got too close to something they were never supposed to see. Some vanish, some get scared and shut up, but every once in a while someone brings us enough to open the door." That was it. He didn't elaborate. They left. And we haven't heard from them since. Weeks passed. Then months. The missing posters didn't disappear, but some of the families started getting updates. Quiet ones, no details, just acknowledgments that new information had come in. We were never named. Not officially. But I think they knew. And we didn't need credit. We just wanted it to stop. Claire changed after that. Not in a bad way. She just softened. The constant tension left her shoulders. The folder stayed on a shelf, untouched now. She didn't check the curtains every hour anymore. We still don't camp. Probably never will again. The gear is long gone. But we take walks. We drive the coast. We breathe better. As for me, sometimes I still dream about the van. Not in a terrifying way, more like a memory that lingers in the walls of your mind. Something half forgotten that comes back in flashes. A sound of branches cracking too close. A car with no plates parked one space over. A shadow watching from the tree line, waiting to see if you notice. But then I wake up, and I check the locks, and I look out the window, and there's nothing there, because they're not following us anymore. We looked back, and they don't like being seen.